Princess Artemis, a tiny girl with dazzlingly white hair, like winter snow, and an angelic smile, held out her hand, clutching a lump of mud, claiming with seriousness that it was supposedly delicious food that she had personally prepared. During a picnic arranged in a blooming garden for all the noble families, young Artemis, with sincere bewilderment, turned to her friend named Pluto with a question why he had not yet touched the dishes, treats, and desserts on their table. Unexpectedly, the good-natured and always cheerful Hercules intervened in their funny conversation, offering, as the court jester, to take the treat from the princess himself in order to demonstrate how a real hero is not afraid even of questionable food. However, the beautiful princess, offended by such a big initiative, objected with dignity, declaring that today she was not playing the role of a fairy tale princess, but the role of a caring mother, because the sweet Pluto got the important role of father in their imaginary family. The lady, with a majestic look, as if in a children's fairy tale, handed the young man with coal-black, flowing strands of hair a lump of mud, as if it were an exquisite dessert, and, beaming with excitement, insistently demanded that he eat his treat to the last crumb. The little girl literally beamed with happiness and childish delight at her own prank. Her face was lit up with an indescribably sweet smile, and her huge blue eyes, full of genuine admiration, sparkled as if she had just presented the queen with the gift of the century. The young man, not wanting to destroy her naive joy, the fairy tale atmosphere of the game, and the tremulous moment of recognition, with a slight internal shudder submitted to her demand, obediently opening his mouth and preparing to take in a piece of earth, as if it were a holiday pie. All the nobles present looked at each other in amazement and visibly tensed up. 3 men even rose from their benches and froze in anxious silence, in deep shock from the fact that Pluto, mysterious and formidable, was actually going to swallow a lump of mud. He was known as Pluto, either a nickname or a sinister appellation associated with myths and ancient legends. And now this young man, whose face usually showed neither fear nor surprise, frowned, looking with irritation at the dirty gift in his palm. The boys tried their best not to laugh at this amazing scene, while the bloody tyrant, maintaining an imperturbable expression on his face, seriously thanked the little princess for such an unusual and touching gift, which he took for granted. In the young man's hands, in addition to the gifted lump, there were already other mud balls, which he carefully sorted through with his fingers, like precious stones, clearly not knowing how to react to what was happening, but not daring to disturb this whole atmosphere of children's play. Suddenly, someone else's hand gently fell on the broad shoulder of the terrible tyrant. The gesture was light, almost friendly, but immediately attracted the attention of everyone standing nearby, forcing them to turn around and freeze in anticipation, because such moments rarely go without consequences. Before him stood a dazzlingly handsome man, with hair as golden as the morning sun, whose name was Endymion. He told his friend with a slight mockery on his lips that for such attention he would be worth eating all the earth from the hands of this little girl. Unlike his sullen companion, the calm Endymion turned to the princess with genuine joy, declaring that he would be ready to eat anything from her hands, and that only a fool would refuse such a sweet gesture, because the little girl clearly put her soul into this act. Artemis, suddenly shyly poking her index finger into her pink cheek, muttered with slight awkwardness that she would definitely mold even more mud pieces so that there would be enough for everyone who wanted one, and everyone would get the same special gift. The mud balls, lovingly and with rapturous care molded by the tiny princess, were left aside, untouched, forgotten, like children's dreams, too naive to be understood by adults, but too sincere to be ridiculed. Suddenly, a bright column of light, almost blinding, illuminated the clearing from the sky, and a deep, menacing voice was heard above the hushed heads, proclaiming that all those gathered there were stupid and ignorant, since they were unable to appreciate the kindness of the princess. From within, the light emerged Myth, a young, shining boy prince, younger than all the others, and without a moment's hesitation, he picked up one of the mud balls from the ground, swallowed it proudly, and solemnly declared that the taste was worthy of no less than 50 points. The young men immediately exclaimed with feigned indignation, rushed towards their friend with a cheerful noise, began playfully slapping him on the shoulders with their hands, loudly declaring that by his actions he had obviously disgraced the ancient and noble family of their ancestors in front of all the nobility. Having mentally said goodbye to this world and accepted the inevitability of his end, young Endymion, with a slight, almost mad smile on his face, prepared to follow his faithful friend, deciding to taste the bitterness of the earth as if it were his last feast. Pluto, unlike the other participants in this strange event, clearly expressed displeasure. He was disgusted that someone dared to offer him scraps and garbage, as if he were not a living being, but some kind of spineless machine for absorbing dirt. Artemis, trying not to give in to fear, suddenly laughed through her tears, as if this loud laughter could protect her from the fate that threatened her, because she was afraid that she could be the next victim of bullying and she would have to repeat someone else's mistake. The brunette, who had long earned a bad reputation in the eyes of those who had ever seen him in battle, took the unfortunate joke with icy fury. His gaze was so piercing and unkind that it became clear that if he was angered, there would definitely be no mercy for anyone. Without a moment's hesitation, Artemis took off and ran towards where, in the distance, a solitary, strikingly bright flower shimmered like a treasured beacon of hope. Turning around, she shouted to her father to follow her as quickly as possible, while there was still salvation. Reluctantly, filled with inner discord, and trembling with barely contained tension, the man took a deep breath, clenching his fists as if trying to hold back the ever-growing irritation inside himself, threatening to burst out at any moment and upset the precarious balance. The tyrant, immersed in his own thoughts and heavy silence, suddenly raised his head sharply, sensing someone's presence nearby, and saw Artemis standing next to him, her white skirt fluttering in the wind, giving her an almost ghostly, surprisingly gentle charm. The little girl, with a light laugh, tinkled tenderly, holding out a pink flower to her boyfriend, who accepted her gift with a sincere smile. So sweet, so unexpected, as if it contained a whole story, left only for the two of them, full of tenderness and kindness. Pluto looked at her, a little embarrassed and surprised, feeling his cheeks begin to blush from surprise and awkwardness. He had not expected such a touching gesture, and now, not knowing how to react correctly, he felt unusually vulnerable and confused. The little girl, without hiding her joy, with a bright sparkle in her eyes and pride, as if slightly bragging, said that this flower was special and was intended only for her daddy, thereby putting into her words much more than just the kind feelings and sincere affection that she wanted to express. Pluto turned away with a slight sigh, looking away with embarrassment, as if trying to hide his awkwardness, and barely audibly added that since the girl was the queen's daughter, then of course she would cope with this and would be worthy of her title, despite all the difficulties. The beauty was happy, despite the man's stern and almost warlike appearance, because despite his severity and outward severity, she noticed how his gaze softened. And this was not only a recognition of her importance, but also a deep understanding of her role. Artemis failed to find her death from overwork in her previous life, and was reborn in a new world, where she had to have 4 fathers at once, each of whom was not only worthy, but also unusually attractive, which became a real headache for her. Now it was incredibly difficult for the little girl to choose among these 4 charismatic men, each of whom had his own unique appeal and was amazing in his own way. But despite this, she still strove to choose the one who would become truly important and beloved to her. A week ago, with deep blue circles under her eyes, from heavy fatigue and in cozy pajamas, the girl, raising her hands with difficulty, joyfully exclaimed that she had finally figured out a complex mathematical theory, which, according to her, was capable of radically changing everything around her. But, before she could finish her thought, she suddenly fell onto the bed from sheer fatigue and overload, and without finishing speaking, she fell into a deep sleep, leaving all her ambitious plans behind, postponing them until tomorrow, as if they had never existed. She passed away at the age of 28, literally exhausted, with fatigue that paralyzed her body and soul, glasses that almost fell off her nose, and blood that flowed from her nose, testifying to her exhaustion and inability to resist any longer. After her death, reborn into a new life, She found herself in a majestic palace that seemed like a real sculpture from a fairy tale, giving her a chance for a new life, as if her rebirth in this world was the beginning of something completely unique and unknown. In her past life, she was a devoted fan of romantic novels and always dreamed of creating something unique, and later decided to prove her theory of symmetrical reincarnation, which could change the views on existence after death. The essence of her theory was the assumption that after physical death, a person passes into another, completely unimaginable dimension, where his consciousness continues to exist, possibly in new forms and states that cannot be seen with the ordinary eye. Proving the existence of such different parallel worlds, filled with fantastic creatures and dragons, is extremely difficult. But she was ready to explore this unknown world, striving to uncover the secrets hidden beyond the visible reality. Her colleagues could not help laughing at her ideas, and considering them to be nothing more than ridiculous inventions, not worth any attention. They were sure that she was mistaken, despite her indomitable persistence and belief that everything she said could be true. But after 8 long years of intensive research and tireless searching, she was finally able to prove that other dimensions really do exist, boundless and mysterious, full of beings that had previously seemed impossible and unattainable. And so, on the horizon of her new life, a girl appeared, blinded by a bright golden star, and her world was filled with flashes of light cutting through the darkness, becoming a symbol of her rebirth, giving her a chance for a new start and the opportunity to discover unknown horizons. Waking up in a luxurious room, decorated with wealth and elegance, with a pink light softly touching her bed, she felt the strangeness of her new body. She was now a child with white hair, which brought her complete delight and surprise. The young child, in complete confusion, got up from the soft bed and went to the huge mirror to look at herself. She noticed that her height was much shorter than before, and her face was unfamiliar and so young that she could not immediately understand what had happened. When she looked into the mirror surface and realized that she had transformed into a little princess, her snow-white skin and bright blue eyes, and her hair became like snow crystals, all this seemed like an incredible miracle given to her by fate itself, a gift of magic. The lovely lady could not take her eyes off her own reflection. Before her was a real porcelain doll, radiating tenderness and grace, as if created to be an object of admiration and delight in the eyes of all the people around her, attracting attention. In this amazing novel, she became known as Princess Luna, the heroine of the book, whose name became a symbol of innocence, beauty, and purity, attracting the attention of everyone who ever heard her exciting and enchanting story, filling hearts with dreams and hope for a brighter future. Suddenly, a strange smile appeared on her face, barely noticeable, but trembling like the morning light wavering on the surface of the water, reflecting all her inner experiences and the uncertainty that was gripping her at that very moment. As if she was experiencing something important, unknown and painful, she laughed loudly, suddenly filling the entire room with her cheerful laughter, delightedly declaring that she had finally proven her theory and had been absolutely right all this time, as if confirming her confidence and steadfastness in her own conclusions, laughing joyfully. But soon, as if everything had suddenly and unexpectedly changed, the lady fell into deep despair when she realized where and with whom she had ended up, and how quickly everything around her had become completely different. Not the way she had imagined this world, when it seemed full of hopes, possibilities, and bright prospects. When the maid entered the room, her eyes widened in horror when she saw the girl sitting on the floor with her head down, absorbed in her thoughts and experiences, as if overcome by a deep inner anxiety, unable to understand what was happening in her life. The windows opened up a stunning view of the most beautiful landscape, where green forests smoothly flowed into a quiet lake, the mirror-like surface of which reflected the sky, creating a picture of the world that seemed completely unaffected by any worries and concerns hidden behind the walls of this cozy room. The maid carefully combed her hair, carefully and tenderly, because this day was special, her 7th birthday, the moment when she was supposed to feel all the changes that fate promised her and also become a symbol of the beginning of a new and important stage in her life. The surprised maid, a little shocked, sat down next to the young mistress, who, completely confused, began to madly beat herself on the head with her hands, cursing her fate and mentally reproaching herself for not getting into a harem with men and a happy ending, as she once dreamed of. In the original novel, the plot unfolded completely unexpectedly when the princess, delighted with an expensive gift for her birthday, an exquisite blue egg with silver inlay, did not even suspect that this gift would be a harbinger of a tragedy that would change her life. However, fate played its sinister role, and a few years later, when the princess was only 12, she was brutally murdered. The terrifying knife-wielding killer who made his way into her chambers became a symbol of the British invasion that would soon change her world forever and destroy all her dreams. The girl who was reborn in the body of a princess in another world was in deep shock and could not understand how it happened that she ended up in the body from the book, as if she herself had become part of someone else's story, which suddenly acquired its own reality and living destiny. Finally, the baby's hairstyle was completed, leaving neat and cute buns on her head, and her long snow-white hair, like a light waterfall, flowed smoothly over her shoulders, giving her appearance an amazing grace and turning her into a real beauty radiating light. The maids were absolutely delighted with the cuteness of the girl, who looked at herself in the mirror so attentively and intently, as if trying to understand how she could have changed so much, feeling every glance directed at her with admiration, amazed at her new appearance. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, and a clear blue sky appeared in the window opening, which seemed to represent the beginning of a new day, as a reminder that the outside world continues to exist, despite all the internal changes happening to the princess. The maids quickly hurried to the entrance, waiting with excitement and trepidation that the dress they had ordered for such an important event would finally be brought to prepare the princess for the meeting that could become a fateful and decisive moment of her day. A knight of the empire entered, and it was Pluto himself, who with respect and calmness announced that he had requested an audience with the princess. His voice was quiet but confident, as always when it came to an important and delicate task that required special attention. Artemis froze in alarm when she recognized the man as a familiar character. Her eyebrows instantly shot up, and her gaze, full of surprise and alarm, with genuine fear and incomprehension, as if she could not believe that she had met him here, in this place. The boy had gray eyes, reminiscent of dark clouds before a storm, from which it seemed that rain was about to begin. His snow-white skin and impeccable knight's uniform created an image as if he had just come from the battlefields, carrying with him a mysterious calm and mortal danger. The man was surprised, but his face remained impassive and cold, as if he had become accustomed to the horrors of war and loss, not paying attention to pain and suffering. His past was full of brutal murders, and on the battlefield he left behind only a scarlet sunset, reminding him of his bloody fate. His eyes, full of fire, shone brightly like sparks in the night, illuminating everything around him with his determination and inner strength. He was not just a servant of the queen, but a demon born for battle, capable of winning the most brutal battles, knowing no pity, no fear, no doubt. The maid, noticing how Artemis suddenly drooped and lost her confidence, approached her with concern and asked what had happened. At this time, Pluto, standing at the door, announced that the girl's escort would soon arrive at the residence in 2 hours. But the chancellor urgently ordered him to come and personally check. The little girl trembled, unable to listen to the man's speech. Every word of his caused horror in her, as she was afraid that dear Pluto could take her life at any moment, just as quickly as he could snatch her last breath, as if her fate had already been decided. The knight stood there coldly, his face expressionless, and declared that he and Artemis would soon meet again, his words sounding like a sentence, cold and inevitable, as if it were only a temporary pause before a new meeting, filled with danger and fear that she could not come to terms with. He could well have been the father of a princess, a beautiful girl, if not for the fact that their destinies had not crossed before, and their connections were barely noticeable, but perhaps not as alien as it seemed at first glance, creating a feeling of a long-lost connection. Before the girl could breathe a sigh of relief, Feeling that the danger had passed, suddenly someone's laughter was heard nearby. Light, sarcastic, as if someone was enjoying her confusion, and this sound penetrated her heart, forcing her to become wary again and realize that the real threat had not yet gone away. They were maids with hearts full of anxiety, embracing each other and saying that they would like to get married, and the sir standing before them was so cold and handsome that his presence involuntarily made their hearts beat faster, as if he were the embodiment of an ideal. Artemis grimaced when she was told that the boy had excellent hearing, and her attention switched to this for a moment, because she had long been accustomed to adapting to the most difficult situations, having learned to hide her emotions and control any of her reactions. She had already experienced the loss of her parents and was used to being alone on secluded streets, surrounded by many men in black robes, with cold looks, not paying attention to her grief, only widening the abyss of despair in her soul, which she hid behind a mask. The blade, painted scarlet, lay on the floor, its edge like an ominous symbol, reflecting the same threatening atmosphere that hung in the air, permeating everything around with a cold feeling, as if every moment was about to be the last, and everything around was about to collapse. Artemis suddenly smiled tightly, her face a mask of politeness and composure, as she thanked the maids for their help, deciding to turn on her charm to the max to smooth things over. Her words were soft, but every word was carefully considered. The maids, noticing the tears on the baby's face, became even more caring, their hearts filled with warmth and concern. They talked among themselves, whispering that, despite the strict rules and restrictions, they would definitely find a way to support her, because her happiness was the most important thing to them. They continued to discuss among themselves how sad it was that they would not be able to attend this important event, but promised that they would do everything so that at least her day would be filled with joy, despite the fact that entry was limited to only the imperial family and nobles. There were tears on the little girl's face when she spoke again, and her voice was barely audible when she whispered longingly that she would like to spend this day in the company of those who understand her, who support her, those who were there when she was especially lonely. The maids, seeing how hard it was for her, began to calm her down without further ado, hugging her tenderly and whispering warm words of support, promising that there would always be a place for her in their hearts, that she would never be alone, and that they would always be there, ready to listen and help her at any moment. With a strained, barely noticeable smile, the beautiful Artemis said bitterly that the maids could try on her mother's dresses, because, according to her, her mother had long since passed away, and her outfits were still hanging in the closet, forgotten and useless, without any purpose. The maid, not knowing what to answer the little girl, froze, feeling awkward and embarrassed, because the offer to try on dresses that belonged to the late queen was not only disrespectful, but also completely inappropriate for their humble position. The lovely little girl nervously clutched the fabric of her white dress, which seemed too delicate and vulnerable to her, and then her gaze suddenly became firm and determined, as if she were planning a cunning and completely irresistible action against the maids. Then, without holding back her emotions, she began to fill her face with tears. The woman's eyes filled with real, sincere pain, and, with an offended expression on her face, she quietly but restrainedly asked if they could at least fulfill this small request for her sake. The maids could not resist such an unexpected and powerful attack, which literally made their hearts tremble, and with a sincere, burning look, they firmly decided to help the princess, despite all the internal doubts and fears that tormented them. When the maids, absorbed in the process of choosing dresses, began to examine them carefully, the second of them, without warning, suddenly pushed her friend away, and, not hiding her excitement, exclaimed with delight that she liked all the outfits without exception, and she was ready to immediately try on each of them. After they had completed their search, it was already night outside, and the moon, high in the sky, illuminated the dim fog, as if giving everything around an atmosphere of mystery and secrecy, as if nature itself was watching with interest what was happening in the palace. The girl stood by the window, frowning as the night engulfed the world, and with thoughts full of tension, she realized that she had very little time left. Only an hour and a half to complete everything she had planned, and not allow the situation to get out of her control. Artemis's head snapped up when she was addressed with genuine interest, and a spark of curiosity instantly lit up her eyes, as if she was just beginning to comprehend what had happened, and a sudden determination appeared in her gaze, as if she had decided that she needed to act. The women appeared in exquisite outfits, peach dresses and green skirts with multi-layered lace, emphasizing their natural grace, like sculptured works of art created by the hands of masters, obsessed with the pursuit of perfection. When Artemis came and stood next to these graceful ladies, they were overcome with genuine admiration, so strong that they were momentarily speechless, because the luxurious dresses turned each one into a queen, giving a feeling of exclusivity and triumph. With a sweet and slightly absent-minded smile, full of childish innocence and genuine kindness, the princess gently asked the maid not to think ill of her, as if her words were a consolation addressed to the heart and not to the mind, imbued with the light and care that she had lacked in childhood. The maids did not answer a word, because at that moment they were lying unconscious right on the cool marble floor, still in a state of genuine shock from the unprecedented generosity of the young mistress, whose unexpected and almost fabulous actions violated order and confused everyone around. Calmly, as if nothing particularly unusual had happened, the girl headed towards her cozy bed, casually shaking her pillow as she went, as if whipping up a cloud of light feathers, and with childish seriousness, full of fatigue and peace, she thought that it was time to plunge into long-awaited sleep. Suddenly, as if by magic and someone's secret prompting, her hand slid under the soft pillowcase, and her fingers felt a thin white silk ribbon, the very one she had been looking for all day. And now, holding the find in her palm, she felt relief and joy spread across her chest. And after that, without wasting a single second and as if guided by an inner instinct, she walked quickly and confidently towards the tall mirror that hung near the bed, reflecting in its impeccably clean glass not only the coziness of the room, but also a barely noticeable flame of determination. Without thinking twice, with her usual dexterity, she grabbed the cold metal handle of the chest of drawers and began to pull out one of the lower shelves, inside which, according to her guess, something important should be hidden, carefully hidden from prying and curious eyes. With a determined, almost menacing expression on her face, the princess stared at the object lying inside the box. This was exactly what she was looking for, and deep down she knew that she would definitely find it right here, among the many forgotten or hidden things. Among the delicate, artificially created blue roses, as if in a magic box of secrets, rested a heavenly colored gemstone, shining with a soft light, which, as she knew, would certainly help her to realize her plans and make the long-awaited escape to freedom. Thus, in the tiny but confident palms of the little girl, there were now two important treasures, a snow-white ribbon and a blue stone, which became her keys to freedom, hope, the beginning of something truly new and mysterious, full of future discoveries. Quickly and deftly, with a hurried grace, she began to tie a snow-white ribbon on an elegant brooch, sitting on the edge of her bed, leaning forward in concentration, as if she knew that there was very little time left for reflection and delay could cost her everything. And then, with a slight tremor in her heart and a tremor in her fingers, she carefully brought the decoration to the window, behind which the full moon was shining brightly, hoping that her homemade creation, filled with dreams and stubbornness, would really shine in the moonlight, as in the old legends. And indeed, the beautiful brooch flashed with an unexpectedly bright light, from which the young girl closed her eyes, barely managing to cover her face with her hands, since the soft glow immediately spread throughout the room, illuminating the walls and filling the air with a magical shimmer and a slight tremor. Now, this magical decoration had amazing power. It could temporarily turn a child into an adult, changing not only the appearance, but also the voice, and in addition, it distorted the perception of others, making the one who wears it completely invisible. The princess, pleased with her little invention, beamed with a radiant smile, sincerely glad that she was able to remember the events from the novel she had read, and now, thanks to her memory and intelligence, successfully applied this knowledge in real life. Skillfully and quickly, as if she had been preparing for this moment for a long time, She secured the snow-white decoration in her light hair, weaving it with such precision and grace that it seemed as if it had been part of her image from the very beginning, and her every gesture was dictated by many years of training. Then, without wasting a second, and driven by a hidden determination, she began to dress herself in a strict, neat maid's outfit, a simple black dress that usually hung in the closet as a backup, but now it was an important part of her disguise, helping to hide her true identity. And finally, as the final touch to this transformation, the young noblewoman fastened a blue brooch on her chest over her dress. It glowed brightly, as if enjoying its role, filling the room with soft light and turning an ordinary outfit into something special and almost magical. Now, grown up and determined, she grabbed the suitcase containing her most precious belongings, not forgetting to apologize to the maids who were enchanted by her courage and bravery to the point of losing consciousness, and rushed to escape, hiding in the shadows of the night. It was a dark night outside, and the sky above her, as if framed by a veil, shone a deep blue, and the moon, high in the sky, illuminated her path, creating a sense of magic and mystery around her, as if the night itself was ready to hide her from her pursuers. Disguised, completely absorbed in her own determination, and barely aware of her surroundings, the princess rushed swiftly through the long corridors, holding on to the suitcase in which a lot of money, gold, and jewelry was hidden, as if this could become her salvation in the coming minutes. Suddenly, from the stunning sight, she froze in place, unable to utter a word, her mouth open in surprise and horror, as if she could not believe what was happening before her eyes. Her heart sank, and only fragments of thoughts flashed through her head, which did not have time to unite into a single whole. In the distance, in the darkness of the corridor, stood Pluto. His figure seemed sinister, and in his hands he held a bloody blade. His face was inscrutable, but his gaze was cold and cruel. Next to him lay the body of the man he had just killed, and this whole moment was imbued with unspeakable cruelty. A dark, bloody liquid dripped from the blade, smoothly flowing down the metal, leaving behind traces of horror and violence that only emphasized the cruelty of what was happening and the mysterious danger of this moment, as if the very shadow in which they were located became even more threatening. The man, badly wounded and almost without strength, lay at the knight's feet, his face distorted by an evil grin, and with contempt he said that Pluto was only the king's dog, and the queen herself was long dead, and that soon their great empire would be destroyed by merciless Britain, which would spare no one. Coldly, but with unwavering determination, the knight replied that it seemed that even the criminal's horrible mouth, despite his helpless position, was still capable of yapping, although his fate had long been decided, and his words were only the last pitiful attempts at resistance. Suddenly, as if in response to the words, a furious, deadly cry was heard, and hot blood splashed out in a wild fountain to the side, creating an atmosphere of horror and despair around, which intensified the growing fear, causing even the most steadfast witnesses to tremble. Horrified and with shaking hands, Artemis instantly hid behind the wall, pressing her palms to her lips, trying to hold back a scream so as not to reveal her fear and horror that gripped her heart, because she had witnessed a brutal murder that would be impossible to forget. Her blue eyes filled with great shock, and her face took on an expression of deep shock and silent alarm as she realized that she had become an unwitting witness to a terrible murder that contained all the cruelty and inhumanity of this world. Suddenly, Pluto, with difficulty, but still managing to get to his feet, said with apprehension that he heard as if there was someone else here. His gaze instantly became wary, and he looked around anxiously, as if expecting to see a hidden threat in any shadow. The man, feeling his strength leaving him, pressed his hands to his chest with effort, and, despite his helplessness, realized that whoever was hiding in this dark place could no longer escape or hide, because an attempt to avoid Pluto, no matter how desperate, was absolutely useless. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps inexorably approaching up the stairs, echoing throughout the ancient stone room, and each strike of boots on the steps sounded like a harbinger of something inevitable, causing the heart to clench with anxiety and fear. And then, against the moonlight, Artemis appeared like a ghost, dressed in a mustard-colored cloth, that gave her figure a certain mystery and elegance. She confidently stepped out from her hiding place, her silhouette becoming clear in the silence of the night, like an inevitable harbinger of what was about to happen that would change everything. The man frowned, his lips twisting into a barely perceptible smile, and he said with obvious irritation that she should not have behaved as if she were among ordinary servants before, hinting at her inappropriate role, which deeply angered him and made him doubt her true intentions. The princess, without losing her dignity, introduced herself with a name that concealed her true origin, and at the same time bowed reservedly before the knight, greeting him with dignity and courtesy, as if obeying the strict norms of palace etiquette. The young man, without hiding his cold detachment, said in an aloof and almost indifferent tone that, in all likelihood, she had chosen a very strange moment for a night walk, as if her actions and choice of time aroused in him not respect, but rather suspicion and bewilderment. After this, without showing any particular interest, he dismissed her with a slight, almost imperceptible gesture, saying that she could now go, and the maid, restraining herself but with obvious respect, made an exquisite curtsy, which was a clear sign of her obedience, despite her inner discontent. But suddenly, before she could leave, Artemis felt herself surrounded, and a voice full of power commanded her to open her suitcase and show what was inside, which made her feel uneasy, as if someone was about to learn her deepest secrets. Awkwardly and with great effort, she tried to justify herself by explaining that her suitcase contained only old things that had perhaps begun to smell bad over time, hoping that this explanation would be convincing enough for her to be released and allowed to leave without consequences. However, Pluto, without showing the slightest hesitation, was adamant and persistent, declaring that he was not used to indulging someone twice, and this time his decision was firm, despite her attempts to justify herself, which made her situation even more desperate. With anxiety and a sinking heart, Artemis, not knowing what else to do, sank to her knees, her movements becoming hesitant as she began to forcefully open her suitcase, feeling her hands trembling with fear, and the thought of the possible consequences only increased her anxiety. Her trembling hand, struggling with the clasp of her bag, was stuck for a moment, and despite her desperate attempts to speed up the process, she realized that she had no idea how to escape from this dangerous situation and avoid even greater trouble. Her body shook with horror, and her heart sank in her chest with every passing moment, because she knew that if the man found money in her suitcase, he would, without hesitation or regret, take her for a criminal and leave no chance for salvation, immediately taking her life. Slowly, with obvious effort, her trembling hands began to carefully lift the lid of the suitcase, her every gesture filled with anxiety and tension, while all around there was a silence that seemed almost unbearably loud and oppressive at this moment. As soon as she tried to continue her actions, their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a strange voice. It was another knight who had just arrived to the commander-in-chief. He shouted that he brought important news that required immediate attention and could not tolerate delay. Pluto, turning to his subordinate with a wary and slightly suspicious look, asked what had happened, to which he replied that the chancellor had arrived, and that the sir had been asked to appear immediately regarding the upcoming birthday of the princess, which needed to be urgently discussed. Upon hearing this news, the man began to argue with his interlocutor, claiming that Pluto was paying too much attention to small details, forgetting about more important issues, such as preparing for a significant event, especially in the current circumstances. Suddenly, the knight's subordinate, as if sensing something was wrong, froze in place. His face instantly turned pale, and the expression in his eyes became full of despair, which made Pluto wary and pay attention to his anxious behavior. Unable to contain the fear that gripped him, the man, noticing the dead body on the ground, let out a cry of horror, and Pluto, remaining calm and focused, ordered him to step aside so as not to interfere, and without hesitation walked away, not wanting to linger. Before leaving, Pluto said in a reserved but insistent tone that their meeting with the maid would still take place, and that he had not forgotten about her existence. The man's voice was full of confidence, but the hidden threat clearly sounded in every word, like a harbinger of the consequences that would not be long in coming. However, Artemis had already disappeared, leaving only emptiness behind, and only the commander's subordinate remained at the scene, with a look of sorrow on his face, who was now busy carefully removing the dead body, following his duties after the tragic incident. The knight's blue eyes, full of alertness and vigilance, carefully followed the disappearing figure of the runaway maid, who melted into the dark corridor, leaving behind a shadow of suspicion, as if she was hiding something important that could threaten their safety. Turning abruptly, he directed his steps along the usual route, trying to escape from the trap of doubts that with each passing moment were squeezing his mind more and more tightly, absorbing his thoughts, and tormenting him with anxious questions about what could have happened. Meanwhile, Artemis continued her rapid escape without slowing down. She raced down a long, almost endless corridor, and then ran out into the street, carrying with her a suitcase filled with anxious thoughts and hopes, with each step moving further away from what she left behind. But suddenly, as if from nowhere, her gaze suddenly widened when the young beauty heard strange music coming from the other end of the street. Listening to this unusual sound, she felt as if something mysterious and invisible, like a shadow, had overtaken her. The melody, gently and mysteriously, coming from behind the closed door, seemed to beckon and attract, filling the air with exciting calm, like a secret hidden from prying eyes, promising something extraordinary, mysterious, and attractive that awaited beyond its borders. Slowly and confidently, the lady headed towards the source of the music. Her steps were measured and full of determination, like those of someone who feels an invisible force of attraction, and with each new step she felt more and more that her path was leading to something important and unforgettable. Approaching the doorway, she carefully knelt down, placing the suitcase next to her, and began to cautiously peer inside, her gaze focused on what was happening behind this closed barrier, as if she was looking for an answer to a long-forgotten question. Her eyes, full of curiosity and lively interest, carefully followed what was happening inside. Each look was filled with anticipation, as if she was trying to unravel the hidden mystery of this mystical place, where everything was unusual and mysterious. In the center of this mysterious hall stood a magnificent young man, dressed in fine green silk robes adorned with golden elements, his majestic appearance creating an aura of magic around him, adding a mystical atmosphere to the whole place. He sang, and his voice, like a gentle and enchanting melody, gently enveloped the surrounding world. His snow-white skin and golden hair seemed to be the embodiment of perfection and harmony, and his whole being, every movement, seemed to radiate an unknown force that inevitably attracted glances to him. Suddenly, he noticed that he was not alone in the room, and, frowning slightly, he slowly turned his head in her direction, fixing the girl with a penetrating, piercing gaze, full of hidden alertness and interest, as if penetrating into the very soul. Then the man, as if absolutely nothing had happened, and as if everything was in perfect order, casually, but at the same time confidently, waved his hand at the princess, as if unobtrusively inviting her to come closer, not to be shy, and in no way to be afraid of him. Despite obvious uncertainty and internal constraint, the young girl, a little awkwardly, but with noticeable trust and hidden hope, nevertheless obeyed his gesture, slowly opened the door, stood up on her feet, and hesitantly took a step to go inside. With a restrained gasp of surprise, she reflexively covered her slightly open mouth with her hand, while her gaze quickly rose upward, following some unexpected detail that instantly riveted all her attention and caused an incomprehensible excitement. They stood opposite each other, not taking their eyes off each other, as if the whole world around them had frozen, and only their glances, filled with silent emotions and unspoken thoughts, were connected in an invisible, almost magical thread, creating a feeling of strange closeness and mutual recognition. The beauty blushed awkwardly, feeling her heart beat faster in her chest, when this mysterious young man, with a light, almost impudent smile, and without the slightest embarrassment, asked her a simple but sensitive question about her name, breaking the fragile, almost fairy tale silence between them. The man, up close, turned out to be almost unrealistically handsome. His skin resembled porcelain in its purity and smoothness, his hair shone with shining gold, and his expressive, iris-colored gaze seemed full of ancient wisdom, calm confidence, and something disturbingly mesmerizing. His name was Endymion. The name sounded like music, and he, like a creature from a fairy tale, appeared before her in green clothes, like a forest fairy or a spirit of nature, because he was one of the most important characters in an amazing, bright, and long-loved romantic novel. As if suddenly remembering her manners, the princess gracefully made a slight but noble curtsy, greeting the young man with that elegant dignity that is characteristic of those who have been brought up in the spirit of ancient traditions, respect for strangers, and royal refinement. When the man suddenly, and with a slight smile, asked if she would like him to dance especially for her, the girl thought for a moment, and then, slightly embarrassed, nevertheless answered yes, as if it would bring joy to both of them. The young man slightly narrowed his eyes, and then, with a sly smile, quietly chuckled and with a slight mockery noted that the lady, apparently, had been spying on him in advance, probably hoping to see something special, rare, and worthy of attention. Otherwise, how to explain her sudden appearance? Blushing and clearly embarrassed, the girl hastily began to justify herself, assuring that everything was not at all as it might seem from the outside, and that her appearance here was completely accidental. But Endymion, slightly bowing his head, asked what such a modest servant was looking for here. Realizing that the moment was too close to a scene from her favorite book, the girl, with hidden excitement, reproduced it as if she were giving a line on stage. Looking straight into his eyes, she quietly asked the young man for one dance, hoping that he would understand the hint and reciprocate. Suddenly, a light, almost invisible wind blew, and under its soft touch, the beauty's snow-white hair, light and airy, like clouds at dawn, began to tremble, coming to life in a chaotic dance, and her satin ribbon, decorated with a pattern, smoothly rose up and swirled in the air. The man reached out with graceful care, removed the ribbon from her hair, and at that very moment, the girl unexpectedly for him turned into a fragile, confused child, almost lost in the oversized clothes, clearly sewn for an adult woman, which gave the scene a strange, almost mythical depth. The handsome man, with interest and a bit of admiration, looked at this mysterious magical object, which, according to rumors, was able to change the appearance of its owner and hide the true essence. This relic had long been whispered about in royal circles as something lost and very dangerous. The princess, suddenly exposed, stood in complete stupor, as if time had stopped for a moment, and her consciousness was still trying to comprehend what had happened. With childish confusion and panic in her eyes, she looked at the young man, not knowing what to say, how to justify herself. The young man, still calm and confident, with a strip of ribbon in one hand, carefully grabbed the huge sleeve of her overly spacious dress with the other, as if trying it on his palm, and carefully pulled the girl towards him, the sleeve dangling unnaturally, emphasizing her fragility and unusual vulnerability. With a momentary softness in his voice and an almost brotherly concern, he explained that he recognized her not by her appearance, but by her words, by that very request for a dance that she had uttered with the same intonations as the heroine in their favorite book. And then, lowering his gaze, he began to gently tie a white ribbon around her wrist. After a short pause, his warm, strong male hands skillfully tied a bow on her thin, almost transparent wrist, doing it with special attention and reverence, as if he put something more than just a touch into this gesture, as if a promise, recognition, and acceptance at the same time. With a tender caress, in which there was an unusual warmth, the man touched the girl's palm with his lips, as if sealing their little shared secret, which from now on would belong only to the two of them. The secret hidden in this kiss became an invisible thread connecting their hearts and trust. Dropping to one knee, as if in strict court etiquette, he greeted the young princess with dignity and nobility as the future queen, thereby expressing respect not for her age, but for her soul, strength, and inner greatness, barely beginning to awaken. The little girl waved her hand shyly, as if trying to stop this all-too-ceremonial moment, and, smiling a little awkwardly, suddenly forgot why she had come at all. The guy narrowed his eyes with curiosity and, still smiling, quietly asked what was wrong with her and why she was so confused. But before the girl could answer with a word, something suddenly changed in the air. Their conversation was interrupted by a strange, stern voice, which sounded like a bolt from the blue. He coldly asked since when this girl had become related to a young man of such a dubious reputation, stood at the edge of the path, watching them motionless and without a single emotion on his face, his cold gaze piercing like a knife. And in his entire figure one could feel that very ruthless severity that is capable of destroying everything warm, fragile, and just emerging between two hearts. Finding herself under Pluto's gaze, the princess felt the tension in her body growing, and involuntarily lowered her head. Hiding her confusion and fear, anxiety arose in her soul. Could she really be in such danger? And this was the end of the road for her. The little girl tried to calm down, desperately convincing herself that everything was not so scary. She was a princess after all, and it was unlikely that anyone would dare to do such a thing, to take her life. But a cold fear had already settled in the woman's heart, which was becoming stronger with every moment. Suddenly, Pluto suddenly grabbed his blade, hidden on his belt with his hand, and began to pull it out with lightning speed, causing the air around him to immediately become tense, like a string ready to snap from the tension. At that moment, it seemed there was not enough time to understand what would happen next. The little girl, clasping her hands in front of her, unable to overcome the growing feeling of hopelessness, mentally said goodbye to life, closing her eyes so as not to see this terrible moment, her heart beating in her chest as if it was ready to break out. But everything remained in the shadow of anxiety. But instead of threatening her life, the knight Pluto suddenly walked towards the man named Endymion. With a cold determination, he raised his sword to his face, and the silence filled with threat immediately became even more tense, as if every moment could be decisive. The guard, with an icy voice and rude insistence, asked how the young man dared to steal and kiss the princess's palm with his filthy mouth. His words sounded like a sentence, leaving no chance for justification, as if he himself was the arbiter of fate, deciding that punishment was inevitable. Endymion, without saying a word, only raised his head and looked up at the guard, his gaze cold and firm, full of determination and inner strength, as if he would not give in to any threats and was ready to stand to the end, without bowing under any pressure. But suddenly, his hand quickly grabbed the hilt of the sword, squeezing her fingers tightly and confidently, as if this moment was the only thing that mattered in this world, where his every gesture could become decisive, changing not only his fate, but also the fate of the princess. Having been wounded, despite the sudden sharp pain, young Endymion, with complete determination, realized that he was ready to give his life for the princess, for the opportunity to touch her, because this sacrifice was the most important thing to him, and nothing could make him retreat. The princess, holding back her tears with difficulty, felt her heart squeeze with anxiety, because she knew that the guy who dared to take this step could pay for every extra look or word, and the punishment would be merciless and cruel, like lightning. Without thinking twice, Artemis, unable to contain her feelings any longer, began to cry, and her tears did not go unnoticed. Pluto, noticing her pain, stopped, and, feeling inner confusion, turned to her with amazement, full of anxiety and doubt. The little girl wiped her eyes with her fists, afraid that now they would kill both her and the young man together. Her heart was pounding wildly, and her thoughts were confused, because she could not understand what would happen now, and what would happen to both of them at the end of this story, what awaited them in the future. But instead of following through with his threat, Pluto stopped, startled by her tears, and found himself in shock, not knowing how to properly respond to her grief and this unexpected weakness that she showed at the most inappropriate moment, amazed by her vulnerability. Suddenly, another man joined them, hurrying, calling for the beautiful princess, his voice sounding panicked and excited, and his steps were quick, as if he was ready to do anything to find her as soon as possible, despite all the obstacles that arose. It was a guard in a strict black uniform who remained at the door, shouting that he could not find the lady anywhere, and therefore desperately searched for her throughout the castle, not paying attention to what was happening around him, absorbed in only one thought: to return the princess home, wherever she had gone. Trying to catch her breath, she finally managed to say that she was surprised to hear her voice, because in front of her stood a boy with pink hair and one open eye, which gave him a mysterious and somewhat mystical look that was impossible not to notice. Artemis, startled by his sudden appearance, stared at him, becoming more and more convinced with each passing moment that before her stood Prince Amur, the royal escort assigned to guard the princess, whose sacred duty it was to protect her at all costs. The beauty, feeling a storm of panic inside her, froze awkwardly, opening her mouth in an attempt to comprehend what was happening, realizing that this was her chance, the only moment when she could ask for help, risking everything, but seeing no other way out, and deciding that she could not afford to hesitate and must act immediately. With a loud cry and bitter tears, the young noblewoman threw herself into his arms, exclaiming his name, and he, surprised and without delay, caught her, feeling the full weight of her emotions, and not expecting such a desperate act, which turned out to be a complete surprise for him. His arms, like steel fortresses, wrapped around her as if he wanted to protect her from the whole cruel world, comforting her at the moment when she felt her fear and despair taking over, promising that he would not allow anyone to harm her again. The puzzled young man asked the beautiful girl what had happened, and she replied that young Pluto was scary, and that he had frightened her with his appearance and actions, which made her feel in danger and confused in her own thoughts. As an excuse, the knight stated that he came there to find out that Endymion was here, and nothing else interested him, because his goal was only to understand what exactly this young man wanted from the princess, and why he was so concerned about her safety. After these words, the man, looking sullenly at both, said that if Amr had finished his useless conversations and investigations, then let him immediately release the princess back to the floor and leave, without interfering with the further development of events, and without interfering in conversations that had yet to be resolved. The painting, which depicted the most important moments of power, literally personified the contours of the state, and Pluto, who was the commander, led the army unconditionally, directing its forces and commanding everything with iron determination, regardless of difficulties. He was so deeply devoted to the late queen that he was ready to make any sacrifice to preserve her honor and legacy, solving every problem with full respect for the woman's memory, and striving to fulfill her will to the end, regardless of the consequences. Suddenly, the argument between the handsome guys was interrupted by a loud voice that addressed the commander directly, capturing his attention and distracting everyone from the current discussion, reminding them that an important event required immediate intervention. The voice belonged to Endymion, who, with the utmost respect, placed his hand upon his face, and, speaking, reminded his interlocutor that he should go at once to the influential chancellor, who had come to discuss urgent matters affecting the whole country. Pluto, hearing this, turned with irritation and obvious contempt to all those present, calling them fools and emphasizing that he had very important reasons for taking the princess with him and not leaving her among people who were not able to understand the situation. However, Pluto could not utter a word, calling them fools, and, as if losing control of himself, he fell silent, leaving on his face an expression of deep anger, which he did not try to hide, because the internal tension was too great, and he could not hold back any longer. The girl, despite all the persuasion, stubbornly refused to get off the hands of the guy named Amur, continuing to shout that she wanted to stay here, not paying attention to all attempts to convince her, and her voice sounded determined and stubborn, as if she was ready to fight for this to the last. Endymion watched the young man in front of him with a slight grin, who became more and more angry and irritated with every glance, feeling his patience gradually running out, and it seemed like the situation was about to get out of control, which only increased the young man's irritation. And so, at last, Pluto, the great and impeccable warrior who had never suffered defeat, was faced with what was a real shock to him, his first defeat, which fell upon him with such force that his confidence and power disappeared as if they had never existed. Endymion looked away with a frown, feeling like he was missing something, like something important was slipping through his fingers, and his gaze became wary, like something was wrong, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it, and this uncertainty in his thoughts was nagging at him, making him doubt his feelings. The knight turned back when he was called, and asked with genuine interest what had happened, why he had such a gloomy look, as if he was going through something important that he could not yet understand, and why his face betrayed confusion and anxiety, which he was trying to hide. Endymion couldn't help but notice with a smirk, making a playful mockery, that Pluto also considered the Princess of Luna as his daughter, which seemed like an amazing coincidence, and there was a hint of sarcasm in his voice, as if he was enjoying the unexpected discovery, which only added intrigue to the already tense atmosphere. After this, the handsome man slightly bowed his head, thoughtfully declaring that he also thought that Artemis could be his daughter, and there was so much uncertainty and bitter irony in these words that his interlocutors could hardly hide their surprise, feeling how difficult such revelations were for him. The stern man, without doubting his revelations or hiding his pride, was still one of the great four created by the queen herself, and his clothes, like his presence, radiated a grandeur and power in which there was not the slightest doubt. Pluto sheathed his sword with a quick and confident movement, as if he was used to such situations, and to this his interlocutor, with an evil grin, noted that, apparently, the truth that was being discussed really had a basis, which could not help but irritate Pluto even more, to which young Pluto immediately replied in a sharp tone that what they were talking about could not be the truth, and therefore it was only a lie, not worthy of even the slightest attention, and in his voice there was confidence that such a truth would still be found out. Amour had the injury in his left eye, not his right, and it was noticeable despite his attempts to cover it up, giving away his lie. But it was too late as he left without explaining anything, carrying the princess through a field of flowers into the forest, leaving all questions unanswered. The young man immediately realized that his deception had been exposed, and he froze in great confusion, realizing that the situation had gotten out of control, and now he had to make a decision on which not only his fate depended, but also the future of the lovely princess. The girl squeezed her amulet on her chest with her fingers, and it began to glow with a bright radiance, as if the magic inside it began to come to life, filling with power, ready to spill out and change the course of events, bringing into the world unimaginable energy and forces that could change the outcome of this battle. The powder hit the guy in the face with such force that he barely had time to react, and Artemis watched this with a sly smile, enjoying how the enemy was weakening, and with each of her movements she inflicted more and more damage, destroying his defense and not giving him a chance to win. The fire flared, and an explosion rumbled through the air, as if the world around them shook as a powerful wave of destructive force engulfed the space, creating a flame that instantly engulfed everything around them, and even the air became hot, unfamiliar, and uncomfortable to breathe. Falling to his knees, the man struggled to look up at the girl, surprised to realize how quickly she had understood and seen through his trick, since he had used disguise, hiding in the darkness while sitting on his knees, and now it was too late to try to hide from her gaze. Holding his wounded eye, blood flowed down the face of the intelligent man, who suddenly returned to his old appearance as a grown man, and an evil expression appeared on his face when he realized that she had realized who he really was and recognized his hidden identity. The little girl, with a smile full of determination and confidence, explained firmly that she had seen through him when she noticed that the wrong eye was damaged, and according to the habits that she knew well from her old friend, her intuition did not fail her, and she understood his deception. The man glared at her, realizing that she had revealed his secret. He was a spy for Britain, sent to kidnap her, but he had failed in his task and ended up being wounded by a little girl who was clearly not as defenseless as she seemed. The criminal, in terrible fear, screamed that no one would know if the boy disappeared, hoping that his disappearance would remain a secret, but his words sounded more like a threat than a request, and this last cry of despair could not hide his true intentions. The cunning Artemis smirked and said that it was none of his business, and that he had been more careful with her, because she had a bomb, hidden and very powerful, ready to strike at the most inopportune moment, and his underestimation of her abilities had now turned against him. This flash was part of the Revolutionary Army, a magical artifact, carefully hidden and used in a cunning manner, designed to combat the enemy, capable of turning the tide of events, and before he even had time to understand what was happening, he found himself trapped. The man lowered his head, sitting on his knees, and with a stunned expression, asked how the lady had come up with such an ingenious weapon, with obvious fear in his voice, despair, because he understood that he was not ready for such a turn of events and was completely unprepared to meet her. In her past life, she was an orphan, and the law in the classroom was that you either adapt or you don't survive. And she learned to act in the face of a tough fight for survival, which became an integral part of her character and thinking, forcing her to become stronger. The girl explained to the enemy that she had cast a spell and activated her artifact, and then the brooch exploded right next to his face, creating a dangerous situation, and she could easily repeat this trick on him again, causing his heart to clench in fear. Suddenly, she was called again, and, turning sharply in the direction of the sound, she froze, with her mouth open, in surprise, not understanding what was happening. And in front of her stood Endymion, his green robes fluttering in the wind, and concern for her was clearly visible in his eyes, filled with anxiety and fear for her safety. It was Endymion who came running towards her, his face expressing excitement, and his voice with a clear tinge of fear for her life, breaking through his usual courage, because he realized that she was in danger, and he might not make it in time at the very last moment, when every second mattered. Suddenly, the criminal grabbed the girl, and she, who had not expected such a turn of events, was taken by surprise. Her heart began to beat faster, and he, with a threat in his voice, said that he would kill her if Endymion made even a step, because he was ready to do everything to prevent her rescue from happening. The man froze awkwardly, afraid for the little girl. His face expressed the full depth of anxiety and anger, and his heart sank from the understanding that he had to choose, retreat or rush into battle, despite the threats and mortal danger that hung over them. The villain with the dagger, with an expression of anger on his face, grinned maliciously, shocked to realize that at least someone had taken on this girl, this brilliant little savior, who put everything on the line with her existence, forcing enemies to fear her strength, intelligence, and courage. Endymion listened silently to the villain's arrogant and pompous speech. His face remained impenetrable, without expressing any emotion, and he, not giving free rein to his inner world, continued to stand as if these words were unfamiliar to him and could not touch his soul. Slowly, with some inner determination, the boy began to kneel down, feeling how the soft grass under his bare feet barely touched his skin. There was no fuss in his movements, and every second felt like time slowed down in anticipation of the inevitable. Obediently, as if reconciled to the circumstances, the young man sank to the ground, bowing his head and closing his eyes, not wanting to show that his actions could lead to pain for the princess, because he did not want to be the cause of women's suffering. The cunning scoundrel, with a grin on his face, began to mock the man who, in his opinion, had not an ounce of dignity, and the princess, seeing this, was ready to burst into tears, because her heart was breaking from a feeling of helplessness and bitterness. Confused, with a slight melancholy and a sense of inevitability in his voice, Endymion muttered that his life, full of struggle, difficult decisions, and inevitable suffering, was not worth a shadow of the life of the daughter of a dead queen, who had experienced much more pain than he could ever imagine. His manly hands were hanging on his knees, inactive, and in this quiet, almost painful gesture lay his entire internal struggle. He did not know what to do, feeling completely helpless and powerless in this situation, where there was neither strength nor confidence. Young Endymion was the second candidate for the role of the baby princess's father, distinguished not only by his mercy and care, but also by his willingness to always be there. His attentiveness to the girl left no doubt that he could become a wonderful guardian. The ribbon on the baby's wrist, which at first glance seemed like an ordinary toy for small children of aristocrats, actually hid a deep meaning, turning into a brooch with a jewel, giving it symbolic meaning and magical power. Thus, this ribbon, in which the blue ball was located, not only served as a decoration, but was also a magical artifact that created a powerful magical shield that protected the girl from any external threats, giving her invisible but strong protection in the most dangerous moments. The girl, desperately trying to escape from the villain's grip, thought about how she could destroy him with a burst of power. But an anxious question arose in her mind whether it was worth doing so, because Endymion was nearby, and she could accidentally harm him. But Endymion was too close, and his presence made it impossible for the girl to use magic, because an accidental hit could hurt him, and she could not allow this, because his life was no less important to her than her own. Lovely Artemis closed her eyes, trying to concentrate and push away the panic fear, reminding herself that she had to pull herself together, not give in to the horror that was all around her, and only in this way could she stand, protecting her loved ones and relatives, despite the danger. Suddenly, with astonishing swiftness and terrifying speed, the blade flashed past, barely touching the princess's fragile skin, and its powerful blow, echoing in the air, left an anxious mark in her eyes, causing her heart to beat even faster. The knife sank into the ground with a loud, dull sound, piercing the soft grass, leaving a deep mark behind it. And even the air seemed to freeze, feeling the cold metal burst into the ground with unprecedented cruelty and determination, like a harbinger of imminent disaster. The criminal, with a mocking and cruel expression on his face, ordered the young man to gouge out his eyes on his knees, and he, shocked by this insane demand, froze in complete confusion, not knowing what to do in this terrible situation, gritting his teeth in fear and helplessness. Radiating evil and hatred, the man pointed his finger in front of him, and with a contemptuous grin declared that if the boy could amuse him, he would think about it and perhaps let go of the impudent princess who remained in his power, taking with her the last grains of hope. The boy gripped the handle of the blade tightly, his fingers feeling the cold metal, and taking a deep breath, he pulled the knife out of the ground, feeling the tension and determination take over his body, forcing him to move with complete concentration, not allowing fear to take hold of him. The young man thought, bringing the dagger to his throat, feeling its point, and internally struggling with doubts, wondering what was better, to give in to threats or to take a risk and try to find a way to save his life and the princess, not paying attention to what could follow his decision. And then, despite the hopelessness of the situation, he smiled tenderly at his sweet daughter, whose gaze was full of hope and trust, and an incredible determination opened up inside his heart. He was ready to do anything to save her, even the most insane sacrifice. As the villain's laughter echoed around him, the man clenched his teeth, gathered all his resolve, and, with anxiety but without hesitation, pointed the blade straight at his face, realizing that this could be his last step, but knowing no other way out. At that moment, a sharp and lightning-fast blow sounded, which seemed to drown out the laughter of the cruel villain. The man instantly fell silent and cried out in sharp pain, not expecting that his painful plan would collapse with such speed and unexpectedness. Pluto, without losing a second, picked up Artemis in his strong arms, as if protecting her from the light itself, and quickly carried her away from the villain, not allowing even a glance of evil to overtake them, striving for salvation and safety away from danger. Holding the baby in his arms with astonishing confidence, the knight, with an impassive, almost icy expression on his face, said that from the very beginning he had sensed something was wrong and understood that they were going to kidnap her, and therefore considered such a pathetic attempt to take her hostage absurd. He then, remaining calm and collected, explained that this was precisely what prompted him to stage the scene of the attack on the blonde man, a clever trick, conceived in advance, aimed at confusing his enemies and making them believe a false picture of what was happening. And indeed, despite his noble birth and outward restraint, the knight was in fact a real tyrant, whose ferocity on the battlefield inspired terror, turning him into a ruthless demon, knowing no mercy and a truly implacable enemy. Clutching her shaking hands to her chest, Artemis suddenly remembered a vivid description from a novel she had read many years ago, and realized with amazement that the man standing before her was the very image of that warrior, majestic, terrifying, and strangely beautiful. Another possible father of the girl, with a calm but wary gait, moved towards them, mockingly saying that if Pluto had been even a little delayed, he would probably have been left with one eye, and only in the best case, given the circumstances. Young Artemis couldn't help but cover her mouth with her hand to hide a slight smile. There was a strange tension between these guys, but at the same time, they were almost talking as if they could become friends if the situation allowed it. Pluto, who had been maintaining an outward calm until then, suddenly changed. His brows drew together sternly, his gaze became tense and gloomy. He cast a sharp, blade-like, restless and angry look towards the princess, and his jaw clenched so hard that his cheekbones became almost dangerously distinct. The girl's hand, lying on his arm, trembled with a frightening fragility. On her skin, above the wrist, there was a narrow cut from which blood was slowly oozing, leaving bright marks on the fabric and causing Pluto a feeling of rage mixed with unbearable fear for her. Without a second's hesitation, the man declared with icy fury in his voice that he was ready to shed blood without hesitation for the wound on the baby's body, to kill the scoundrel who dared to touch her, without feeling a drop of regret or mercy for the terrible villain. The next moment, cold metal flashed, and its blade sank into the ground with a heavy, dull sound, so close to the body of the villain that he almost collapsed from fear. It seemed as if the very breath of death touched his skin, hanging over him like an inescapable, huge shadow. Artemis, overcome with terror, pressed herself so close to the knight as if she hoped to hide from all the cruelty of the world. Her hands trembled. Her lips barely found the words, when in a broken whisper she begged not to shed blood, begging him to stop and spare his life. Crying, through sobs and a trembling voice, the little girl sniffled and quietly called the man Daddy. This simple, innocent word, full of trust, pain, and childish hope, seemed to cut through the ball of his rage, forcing him to finally stop and exhale heavily. The young man, looking at her with unexpected softness and a shadow of confusion in his eyes, lowered his gaze, and then looked at the girl again, pressing her tighter to himself, trying to comfort her, to hug her, as if he could protect her with his warmth from everything that caused pain, and never let her go from his embrace again. Meanwhile, the blonde, without waiting for an order, knelt before the commander of the knights, eagerly listening to his words, not daring to object, being ready to do whatever was required at this decisive and, possibly, fateful moment. Young Pluto, without a moment's hesitation, with clear determination, ordered the youth to deliver the criminal to the prison block and keep him under the strictest surveillance, and then briefly added that he himself was forced to leave, for duty called him to where a new battle awaited. Turning around, the man confidently and silently walked away, carrying his daughter in his arms, and the girl, not yet fully comprehending what had happened, still could not believe that her timid, almost accidental daddy was really able to awaken warmth in this stern man and stop the raging fury of his heart. The night was calm and mysterious. The moon, full and bright, illuminated the boundless blue sky, which seemed exciting, like the ocean at night, absorbing everything around with its bottomless brilliance and quiet grandeur, as if time itself had slowed down. The knight took his time, holding his daughter tightly in his arms, step by step, heading towards the majestic palace, the princess's beautiful home, which towered against the night sky, shining like a stone hidden in dark shadows, piercing the night silence with its mysterious grandeur. Pluto, despite all the chaos that was hidden inside his soul, once again returned to his usual cold and dispassionate expression on his face, walked forward, not allowing himself the slightest emotion, so that it seemed that the whole world, its worries and problems, no longer existed. Suddenly, Pluto's eye was caught by a four-leaf clover, which, according to popular belief, brought good luck to whoever found it. This rare and mysterious clover, bright and striking against the dark ground, made him pause for a moment and wonder if it was an ominous sign. At that moment, noticing his attention, Artemis, feeling anxiety inside herself and a desire to sort out her thoughts, quietly asked the knight to let her go for the night, claiming that she needed a little time to be alone and come to her senses, to sort out her feelings and experiences. As soon as her feet touched the ground, she took off like a frightened bird, heading across the grass, and the commander, without losing a moment, followed her with a quick and confident step, as if ready to hold her back at any moment, not allowing her any attempt to hide or run away. The girl, without thinking for a second, ran up to the grass and, as if in search of salvation or luck, picked a four-leaf clover, squeezing it tightly with her fingers, believing that this particular clover would bring her luck and help her overcome all the difficulties that lay before her, giving hope for a better future. Vague but important memories came to her mind of someone very dear to her, with a gentle and warm voice, telling her a story about how the four-leaf clover had once been part of a three-leaf plant that had been torn and destroyed. Staring thoughtfully at the clover in her hands, Artemis tried to remember who exactly told her this story, at what point their conversation became so meaningful, but the memory, like a fog, refused to reveal all the details, as if hiding a part of itself from her, leaving only echoes. Her heart, like a crystal veil, was broken into pieces, and each of these pieces tormented her soul, making her feel as if she was lost in this world, as if she would never be able to recover from all the emotions and pain she had experienced that did not let her go. Her luck, like that four-leaf clover, was disappearing into pain, as if it was melting into that dreamy place where her heart should be. But instead she felt empty, and life seemed like just a series of broken hopes and disappointments, like that moment when she was looking for answers, but couldn't find them. In Korea, her life was unbearably hard and full of fear, because she was an orphan who had no place in this world, in a school where no one loved her, where every day was filled with loneliness and despair, and each new day seemed like an endlessly difficult test. She believed that her theory of reincarnation in another world would one day bring her a chance at a new life. But as she became increasingly aware of her vulnerability, she began to fear that she might die at the age of 12, like the character in her favorite novel, with an inevitable tragic fate awaiting her at any moment. The child's fingers twirled the clover incessantly, believing that its four petals would bring her luck and protect her from harm, as if fate itself were to be tied to this clover, which had once given hope and direction, and now became a symbol of her hopes. After that, with a light but still barely noticeable smile, the princess turned to the guy, begging him in her own words not to leave her and stay close, asking Pluto to stay with her, because at that moment she so needed his presence, a feeling of safety and support. As he waited, Pluto's mouth dropped open in surprise, as the sweet little girl, with an innocent expression on her face, took the clover and placed it behind his ear, saying with a soft look that it was her gift, given with such sincere and naive joy that his heart melted for a moment. With a bright, almost radiant smile, the girl said that the clover was a gift for him, her little joy and desire to convey at least a little happiness to the one who cared for her, and this simple but sincere harshness made him look at her with surprise and new respect. Handsome Pluto was clearly embarrassed and shocked by this unexpected act of attention. His eyes expressed shock, but there was also tenderness in them, affection, which he tried to hide behind his usual cold mask, but it could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, Endymion carried out the order without losing time, and led his prisoner through the forest, who, despite all his intentions, allowed himself the mistake of deciding to attack the sweet princess, not realizing how dangerous it was for him. Irritated but silent, Endymion continued on his way, his gaze directed to the side, absorbed in his thoughts. He thoughtfully analyzed what was happening, trying to control his emotions, hiding his dissatisfaction, and the thought that he should be more careful in the future. The villain licked his lips, and in his eye there was a crystal that shone so brightly that it seemed ready to release a beam of light, radiating an ominous danger. And in his gaze there was a cold confidence, a harbinger of something alarming and deadly dangerous that did not bode well. Suddenly, he made a dash, trying to break free and escape, but his attempt was so restless and unsuccessful that his body jerked forward as if seeking salvation. But in the end, he encountered an even more powerful obstacle and could not move from the spot. His attempts were in vain. The man instantly threw the young man to the ground, his eyes filled with rage. He could not hold back and shouted angrily at how stupid the subordinate had acted, who dared to challenge the royal family, and there was so much unreasonable insolence in this act that he could not forgive it, and did not intend to forgive it. But as soon as his words began to sound in the air, a powerful blow from a fist interrupted his speech. A hand quickly pierced right into his ribs, and he fell silent. His body froze at the moment when he felt the pain penetrate into every cell, depriving him of strength. Endymion spoke about his origin, saying that he comes from an ancient clan in which, from the earliest years, they taught how to strengthen muscles, raising each representative to be a real strong warrior, ready for any trials and battles. Endymion had eyes that were a vibrant violet, like a cat's, radiating a mysterious strength and hidden power that was passed down from his ancient ancestors. His gaze, filled with mad determination, reflected all the power that flowed through his veins and filled his soul. The villain's face was distorted with terrible fear, his features wrinkled, distorted into ugly shapes, and his eyes radiated complete despair and hopelessness because he realized that his carefully thought-out plan was failing, and now he could no longer control what was happening. Pluto slowly lowered his head, not wanting to let go of the princess, because she was trying to escape from the palace again, which always made him angry, and he could not let her go, since she was his prisoner and an integral part of his cunning plan. The little girl froze, overcome with terror, unable to move, because young Pluto was determined to take all her things and destroy them, as well as cancel her birthday party so that the princess could no longer escape, and did not arrange another escape. The little girl realized that all her attempts to escape were in vain, and the hope of freedom finally disappeared when the young man, with a slight smile on his face and confidence in his voice, said that an important meeting would soon take place with the chancellor, who had come to them on important business. With slight regret and a sincere sense of guilt, the lady turned to her knight, politely asking for forgiveness for her actions, assuring him that she herself was to blame, and in no way wanted to cancel the celebration in honor of her birthday, which was so anticipated. Artemis, still slightly hurt, pouted, feeling her heart squeeze, and with slight irritation stated that she was perfectly fine, did not need protection, despite the fact that her gaze betrayed her internal struggle and anxiety. When the princess expressed her complete confidence that he would always be there to protect her, Pluto, slightly embarrassed, felt his face flush and his eyes filled with genuine surprise and confusion that he could not hide. The beauty, despite all the chaos that was happening, with confident determination in her voice, declared that she had always believed in this man and his strength, knowing that he, like a true knight, was ready at any moment to stand up for her and fight back against all enemies who dared to touch her. The young man, continuing on his way with the girl in his arms, announced with a slight sigh that he would postpone the important visit to the chancellor and, concentrating all his attention, carefully prepare every moment for the Little Moon Festival so that it would be unforgettable for all present. Pluto, striding forward with cold determination, acted as if he had no intention of raising the issue of canceling the party for several minutes, which created a tense silence that made everyone around him feel uneasy and uncertain about what would happen next. The maids, as soon as they noticed his approach, immediately rushed in different directions, trying to hide from view, realizing that something unexpected and alarming had happened, which would certainly change the course of events in this majestic palace, filling it with tension. As soon as they noticed that the little girl was no longer alone, but that her knight was next to her, the maids bowed politely to him, greeting him carefully and reservedly, and then performed an elegant curtsy, showing their respect despite the excitement they were hiding. The girls, having gathered themselves together a little, began to complain to each other that they had been very worried when they noticed the disappearance of the little lady, because this was a serious cause for concern, and they could not get rid of anxious thoughts about what would happen next. The man, noticing their concern, began to scold the maids with obvious irritation, pointing out their inability to keep an eye on the little girl, who, using magical items, ran away, breaking all the rules and escalating the situation. As soon as the beautiful Artemis approached him, she silently raised her finger to her lips, gesturing to the knight to remain silent, so that he would not reveal her deepest secrets, leaving everything she was hiding in the shadows, where it should not become known to any outsider. Pluto, instantly understanding her silent signal, changed the subject, holding back his emotions, and with determination gave the order to the maids not to relax their vigilance and strictly guard the princess, because now no mistake could be forgiven, and her safety was at risk. The girls, with a heavy sense of guilt, silently lowered their heads, their eyes filled with shame and regret when they realized that they had failed to keep an eye on the little girl, allowing her to leave the palace, thereby jeopardizing the safety and reputation of the entire court. If all three girls had been found guilty as a result of this catastrophe, the consequences would have been dire, for their heads would have been in danger of execution, which would have left their destinies forever in the shadow of tragic consequences that they could not even dream of. Sweet Artemis, unable to think of anything better than to burst into tears, began to scream loudly, accusing Pluto of being terrible and scary, which completely disturbed the peace and harmony of the world around her, plunging everyone into a tense atmosphere. The maids, noticing her tears and grief, immediately rushed to her, surrounding her with care and attempts at consolation, admiring what a sweet and fragile girl she was, ready to help in any situation. But their words could not calm the raging storm of emotions that engulfed the princess. Artemis, with tears in her eyes, could not take her eyes off her companion, trying in vain to catch even the slightest reaction, in anticipation of him finally showing care and attention that could ease her mental anguish and return at least a small piece of peace. Pluto, clearly in a panic, did not know how to react properly or how to calm the princess down, because his mind was in turmoil, and as if in desperation, he hastened to explain that kidnapping a member of the imperial family was not only immoral, but also completely illegal. Suddenly, in this tense moment, another lady joined them, running quickly towards them, as if she already knew what was happening, and felt that her intervention was necessary to dispel the growing tension and calm the situation. It was another maid who, excitedly, began to tell about an old tradition according to which a daughter usually stood next to her father at an important event. But in this case, the situation with the princess's parents was special and required exceptions. Ultimately, it was the sweet Pluto who had to take on the role of father to the little girl, and he had to carefully select a suitable formal suit for the holiday so that everything looked perfect and in keeping with the special occasion. The young man, without thinking for long, agreed to the proposal and asked the beautiful lady to wait a couple of minutes, and he took the princess in his arms to take care of her comfort and safety at this tense moment, while knowing that this was an important step. Then, with the head adult maid standing by his side, he continued down the great corridor, leaving the princess in the safe hands of her nannies so that they could prepare her calmly for the coming celebration, determined not to lose a moment and to do everything as required. The maids, realizing the importance of the moment, gently asked their little mistress to wait a little while until they returned with her new clothes, so that the princess could be ready to meet the guests and look impeccable on this solemn occasion. The little girl, with deep sadness in her soul, waved her hand goodbye to them, realizing that her carefully thought-out plan of escape, which seemed so close to being realized, was now destroyed, and her heart was filled with pain and anxiety, leaving only emptiness and despair. Artemis, standing by the window, was carefully watching what was happening behind the glass when her gaze accidentally caught the silhouette of a boy who seemed to be floating in the air, not far from the palace, illuminated by the dim light of the moon, creating a certain magical atmosphere in the night. The young man, sitting on the very edge of the beautiful roof, was completely absorbed in contemplating the night sky. His gaze seemed to be searching for answers among the endless stars, and it seemed that he was detached from everything happening around him, immersed in deep thought. Suddenly, after a few minutes, the young man jumped off the roof with determination, breaking the entire silence of the night, and quickly flew down, leaving behind only anxiety and uncertainty, because no one could understand what could have prompted him to such a desperate step. Artemis, overcome with shock and alarm, barely held back a sigh, feeling deep concern for the young man, and leaning over the balcony, tried to see what had happened to him, desperately trying to understand the reasons for his actions and how he ended up in such an alarming situation. When the maids returned with the new blue dress, Artemis jumped, suddenly caught by their attention, and felt her heart beat faster, as if she sensed that this event would be a turning point and an important moment for her further actions. The little girl, standing in her new exquisite dress and blue shoes, was a true embodiment of grace and beauty. Her image literally radiated light, filling the entire room with an atmosphere of magic and refined elegance, which made her truly irresistible and charming at that moment. The young man and the young maids, barely able to contain their admiration, exchanged glances, realizing how amazing the princess looked in her new outfit, and could not hide their admiration. Her beauty was flawless and truly captivated the gaze of those around her. One of the maids, looking closely at the baby, could not contain her admiration, and quietly said that the princess was incredibly similar to her late mother, the queen, noting how her features reflected not only external, but also royal qualities that made her a worthy heiress to a great family. Suddenly, as if by magic signal, the deafening sounds of fireworks rang out in the dark night sky, as bright flashes of fire cut through the darkness, and a bright glow appeared in the window, reflecting all the richness of emotion and magic that reigned in this exciting and unforgettable moment. Pink sparks, like little fiery creatures, flew in different directions, leaving behind a glowing trail, filling the space with the air of magic and creating an atmosphere in which it seemed that the whole world was bowing before this miracle and the grandeur of what was happening. The clock on the high tower loudly struck midnight, its ominous sound echoing throughout the kingdom, reminding everyone that a decisive moment had arrived, the beginning of a new era, and their lives, like history, had turned to this long-awaited moment. At that moment, a loud cry rang out across the square in honor of the memory of the queen and the living princess, and the crowd that had gathered in the square jubilantly exclaimed, throwing a grand celebration with fireworks that lit up the night sky and reflected the joy of the people. Here comes Pluto, holding his lovely princess in his arms, who was dressed in a gorgeous blue dress, decorated with bright, sparkling stars, as if reflecting the infinity of the universe. Pluto looked impeccable in his snow-white suit. His image radiated grandeur. The night slowly swallowed everything around, enveloping the world in deep darkness, and the moon, like pure milk, gently illuminated this darkness, creating a truly mystical atmosphere in which it seemed that time had stopped, absorbed by its mysterious and enchanting light. A multitude of white doves, like little stars, soared in the sky, their delicate wings flashing in the moonlight, like a reflection of the cosmos itself, creating the feeling that they were part of the universe, symbolizing the peace and harmony of this quiet and magical evening. Pluto, dressed in an exquisite formal suit, looked simply incredible. The man's embarrassed look, full of love and affection for his daughter, radiated that depth of feeling and care that made his image even more touching and soulful. The princess, with slight embarrassment and surprise in her eyes, could not take her eyes off her father, quietly muttering how handsome he was, as if all her pride in him poured out into these words, reflecting her admiration for the greatness and nobility that she felt in his every movement. Suddenly, as their bodies began to slowly descend, the father sensed his daughter's anxiety and, with amazing care, held her tighter to himself, as if not allowing anything in this world to destroy their unity and protect her from any terrible dangers. Together, rushing down from the top of the tower, they moved as if in slow time, their figures mysteriously disappearing into the air, and everyone who watched this fall could not take their eyes off the majestic spectacle, amazed at the beauty and harmony of what was happening, while the entire nation watched with bated breath as the sweet princess and her father fell. Everyone began to discuss this magnificent event, admiringly noting how gracefully and elegantly they fell down, as if they were part of the most magical tale. As their bodies landed softly on the ground, as if the invisible hand of fate itself had softened their fall, an atmosphere of admiration immediately arose around them, and all eyes turned to the princess, whose beauty and charm resembled Cinderella at the most magical moment of her life. The nobles, who entered majestically before the people, found themselves in the center of everyone's attention, and a deathly silence immediately reigned around them. Every eye was riveted on their figures, for they personified all the grandeur and nobility that could be seen at this important moment. Unable to contain their delight, the entire huge crowd exclaimed and burst into loud cries of admiration, sincerely wishing the princess happiness, prosperity, and wise rule, because everyone was sure that her reign would be a time of harmony, peace, and great success. The little girl, embarrassedly pressing her hands to her chest and feeling her cheeks burning with shame, looked at everyone with sincere surprise. Her heart was filled with pride, and the girl felt how her soul was touched by this unforgettable and exciting atmosphere. Suddenly, among the crowd, her gaze fell on a man with bright blonde hair who was dressed in a crisp white classic suit. His presence caught her attention, and she felt a strange excitement, noticing a familiar face in this crowded and noisy sea. It was Sweet Endymion, a noble and mysterious figure who kept his eyes fixed on the little girl, and, slowly raising his sulphur-gloved hand, waved softly to her, as if conveying through the evening air an invisible message, full of warmth, care, and unspoken affection. While the little girl, all aglow with childish joy, shyly and trustingly waved her hand in response, Pluto, not hiding his dark rage, glared at his rival, who dared to lay claim to what was sacred to him, the love of his kind and sweet daughter. From the shadows of the crowd, like an incredible spirit of a night dream, emerged a tall man with silky emerald hair falling to his waist and a snow-white mask hiding his face. He walked so lightly, as if he were not walking, but gliding through reality, led by the wind. This mysterious stranger turned out to be none other than the host. He loudly and solemnly called on everyone gathered under the starry sky to greet the noble and brilliant family that appeared before them in all its eccentric glory. And suddenly, as if magic itself had intervened in the course of events, a sparkling Easter gift intended for the little girl appeared next to the man, and then an excited voice was heard, informing everyone that an exciting hunt for expensive eggs had begun. Sweet Artemis clenched her teeth so tightly that for a moment it seemed that they would crack. Her gaze was riveted to the emptiness where an incomprehensible game was beginning, and a cold fear was growing inside. All this was frighteningly real, like a prologue to a terrible tragedy. The young man, with an expression of delight on his face, sharply raised his finger, pointing forward, and spoke with enthusiasm. According to him, the hidden eggs were not simple trinkets, but were disguised artifacts that kept the magic of ancient times. Among the many hidden artifacts, there was one truly unique egg, carefully hidden from prying eyes, and it was this egg that possessed the power to radically change the course of the entire royal game and disrupt the established order. Continuing the story with a special significance in his voice, the adult man said that this rare egg was given to the young princess on her birthday by the queen herself, and, being of great value, brought the player 12 points, more than any other trophy. After this, the host, changing his intonation to an ominously serious one, warned, "Whoever finds this royal egg is obliged to return it to the princess without delay. Otherwise, the violator will face inevitable death as retribution for greed and disobedience." A slight murmur suddenly arose among the crowd as the participants whispered to each other, passing rumors and gossip to each other, discussing the mysterious details of the game, in which, as they said, the stakes were higher than it seemed at first glance, and every word could be decisive. There were rumors that the game would involve an automatic egg absorption mechanism and a special ritual, an ancient summoning spell that would help participants find one of the magical eggs, among others, hidden in the most unexpected places. One of the representatives of the aristocracy, squinting with curiosity, asked the question that was worrying everyone. What would be the main prize for the winner, who would take first place in this mysterious but clearly important game and highly valued by the nobles? The answer had the effect of a bomb exploding. It turned out that, as a reward, the winner would receive the honor of dancing the first dance at the royal ball with the princess of the empire herself, a rare honor, almost mythical, as if from ancient legends full of magic. The eggs were carefully hidden throughout the great imperial palace, and from that moment on, the real hunt began, filled with excitement, passion, and thirst for victory in the hearts of everyone who dared to take part in this epic battle, full of mysticism and secrets. The nobles, without losing a second, rushed forward with blazing eyes and unwavering determination, ready to do anything to get ahead of the rest and get the main treasure of this brilliant and dangerous game, full of traps, riddles, and unexpected turns. The musicians played exciting melodies on the strings of their instruments, creating an atmosphere of magic and awe, where each chord seemed like a sign of things to come, a harbinger of an inevitable fate for each participant in the game. The lovely Artemis, sitting in the corner and leisurely eating cookies, watched how everyone around her was enjoying the holiday and having fun carefree. The great noblewoman, absorbed in her thoughts, was thinking about something distant and personal that worried her the most. She wondered if she had managed to find some Easter eggs, because they could play a key role in her escape from the palace in the future, becoming the very objects that would change her destiny and open the way to the great freedom that seemed so far away. When suddenly the little girl, unexpectedly raising her head, noticed Endymion running towards her, beaming with enthusiasm and ready to share his excitement about what was happening, as if this moment was only the two of them, and no one could ruin it, as if the world around her had slowed down. Without thinking twice, the girl moved away from her father and, trying to catch up with her friend, ran towards him, faster and faster, feeling her heart fill with joy from meeting him, despite all the tense atmosphere around her, which did not let her go, but seemed far away. Worried, the girl began asking him if he was okay, worried about his safety, to which he confidently replied that he was not injured, and his participation in the game still did not threaten his well-being, as she feared, and everything was under complete control. The guy, full of confidence and with a slight smile on his face, declared that he would collect the most eggs and even steal the first dance with the princess, because she seemed so sweet and charming to him that such a chance could not be missed, no matter how difficult it was. Irritated by this statement, Pluto called the man noisy and useless, not hiding his indignation, as if every word he said was filled with anger and contempt for the man who dared to speak in such a way, not understanding the seriousness of the situation. The little girl stood awkwardly in the background. The women's eyes darted between the arguing men, and despite the desire to intervene, she remained in the shadows, feeling how the tension in the air was growing, and her presence seemed inappropriate and unnecessary at this moment. Pluto sternly asked the princess to come to him and take his hand. His voice was cold and commanding, as if every word he said sounded like an order that she had to carry out without asking questions, submitting to his will, even if it did not suit her. The other young man, not wanting to be left out, also tried to attract the little girl's attention, gently inviting her to come to him and leave Mr. Rude alone, creating an atmosphere of light irony, as if he was ready to intervene for the sake of her comfort and convenience. Suddenly, the presenter noticed that young Artemis was in a difficult situation, and removing his white mask, he revealed his face, demonstrating steadfastness and determination, as well as a willingness to intervene in the situation, if necessary, for her safety and peace of mind. The trio stood frozen in surprise as a young man walked towards them, his steps confident and full of determination, as if he was ready to change the course of events and intervene in an argument that seemed likely to have unpredictable consequences for everyone. The Chancellor, Eugene, who appeared before them, was truly magnificent. His green hair, perfectly tailored suit, and refined features created the image of a true aristocrat who approached the princess with the deepest respect, causing admiration among all those present. The little girl, struck by his appearance, froze, the female eyes literally riveted to his appearance, as if she was hypnotized. Every stroke of his face, his grace and charisma, caused her to tremble and admire, as if she had met true beauty for the first time. The Chancellor raised his index finger and stated with confidence that he knew full well how worried the lords were, as Artemis had almost been kidnapped today, which had shocked everyone involved in what had been an extremely difficult and stressful day. After these words, he looked away, as if trying to find the right words, and added that, in the forest, he had recently come across something completely incredible, something that could change everything that they had previously considered true, causing everyone to be wary and expectant. The men and the girl looked at each other with interest, not hiding their curiosity, having learned that the young man had conducted his own personal investigation, using the lunar eclipse and analyzing the memories of others to find out the truth about the kidnapping of the former queen's daughter. An eclipse of the moons, according to the ancient and mysterious slang of the nobility, meant a very strange and mysterious circumstance when a corpse was unexpectedly found, which immediately became the center of discussion, causing many suspicions, rumors, and even fear among all those present. The blond guy raised his finger up, and with an uncertain and almost tremulous expression on his face, he said, clearly disingenuously, that, in his opinion, the punishment for the criminal was appointed by heaven, as if he was not the murderer, although everyone knew perfectly well the cruel and bitter truth hidden from view. And indeed, this scoundrel was destined to die tragically, despite all his attempts to avoid punishment and to forever hide his crimes, since his fate was predetermined not only by people, but also by the inevitable cosmic justice that cannot be deceived. And in the end, Princess Luna herself, the heroine of this novel, was also predicted and planned to die. But the girl whose soul entered her body from another world was determined to change the course of events and find a worthy, bright, and happy ending for this story. Suddenly, Pluto spoke up, surprised and clearly perplexed, asking why the chancellor had not lifted the ban if he already knew about the murder, since his silence and inaction called into question the entire policy of justice, fairness, and power in this kingdom. To which Eugene put his finger to his lips, and, with a mysterious and somewhat enigmatical expression on his face, mysteriously declared that it would be difficult for him to trust the lords and the queen's daughters, since doubts, like shadows, tormented his heart, and he could not be sure of their true intentions. The nobles around shuddered at these words, for they knew well that the chancellor had no intention of canceling the banquet, and now it seemed that the situation had become even more tense and dangerous than they could have imagined, giving rise to a host of questions and growing fears. There were many people in the palace invited to a dinner party, and a special spell was cast to keep an eye on them, looking for possible assassins or spies among the guests, which gave the whole event a special atmosphere of deep anxiety. After which, Eugene, full of delight and enthusiasm, grabbed the princess by the hands, as if trying to strengthen their bond, and suggested that they look for Easter eggs together, which looked playful and a little absurd, but at the same time could have been a deeply symbolic gesture. The men and lords clearly did not like this, and they began to analyze Eugene's every step with redoubled caution and heated discussions, preparing to fight for the baby, the princess, who became their main target in a political game in which everyone was looking for benefits. Seeing this, young Eugene was clearly frightened and quickly walked away, raising his hands in front of him, embarrassedly declaring that it was just a joke, to somehow relieve the tension and return the situation to a lighter channel, trying to avoid further misunderstandings. The boys were taken aback when Artemis, with determination and persistence, declared that she was going to look for the eggs herself, without their help, emphasizing her independence and desire to act in her own way, which immediately put them in an awkward position, making them feel overly intrusive. The final blow for them was her phrase that she would hate them if they interfered with her search for eggs, since she wanted to play alone and fairly, without the help and interference of adult men, wanting to preserve her space and freedom. The men tried to convince the little girl that it would be dangerous to search for eggs alone, that she needed their accompaniment to ensure her safety, but she remained adamant in her decision to try something on her own and in her own way, unwilling to trust them in this matter, despite their insistence. And so Eugene, dropping to one knee before the little girl, quietly and sincerely said that she might give him her hands, and his voice sounded soft, almost pleading, as he tenderly took her small hands in his large ones, as if wanting to show his care and support. He took her small hands tenderly into his large, strong palms, as if trying to convey to her not only warmth, but also the assurance that she was safe. The touch was both gentle and of inner strength, as if his hands were made to protect her from all the storms of this world. Suddenly, as if by the command of invisible magical forces, a magic egg began to materialize in front of her, appearing straight out of thin air, smoothly and mesmerizingly, as if breaking all the laws of nature and creating a sense of magic around her, as if reality itself was giving way to a miracle. Artemis watched with invisible delight as the egg slowly disappeared in her hands, absorbed by the luminous stream, as if dissolving in magic, leaving behind only a feeling of inexplicable surprise and mysterious excitement that enveloped everything that was happening. Thus, as soon as this little girl casts one spell, a bright firework of magical sparks flares up above her head, by which they can find her at any moment if danger arises, following this light that leads to her. The lords standing next to them were overcome with despondency and a sense of helplessness, realizing that they now had no more excuse to go with dear Artemis, for she herself had shown how capable she was of acting without their help and interference. The chancellor, watching everything that was happening with a barely noticeable smile on his face, quietly laughed and humorously noted that when Artemis grows up, she will have no shortage of suitors, referring to her extraordinary attractiveness and the powers that she will radiate. His cry cut through the silence of the night, breaking the atmosphere, and this statement clearly did not please the baby's fathers, who immediately became wary, their eyes filled with anxiety, as if they had a premonition that soon everything would change, and they would have to face the consequences. The handsome guy now had a bandage on his head, but he stood to the side with a forced smile, trying to look calm, although there was a subtle worry in his eyes, hidden behind the outward ease, as if he already knew that there would be consequences. The men began to argue heatedly among themselves about who would be the first to find all the Easter eggs and win the right to invite the princess to the first dance, and all their efforts now looked like a struggle for her attention and respect, a desire to get ahead in this interesting game. Endymion, nicknamed the Cerberus of the great empire, did not bear this name in vain, because his reputation in battle was impeccable, and he was someone who was not only feared, but also respected. His incredible strength and fearlessness were repeatedly tested in the most brutal and merciless battles, where he always emerged victorious. After meeting the queen, both guys, who had previously seemed determined, became even more self-confident, as if they had gone through a difficult test that changed their perception of the world, making them stronger and more resilient, ready to face any difficulties that lay ahead. And so, without a second's delay, they rushed forward, rapidly participating in the hunt, competing with each other in speed, as if the wind was driving them along the paths of a spring garden, and excitement, inspiration, and the desire to win warmed their hearts brighter with every step. The chancellor watched this scene with a slight, almost thoughtful smile, holding his hand to his cheek and squinting from the sun, and a lively interest flashed in his eyes, as if he was enjoying the development of this small but exciting drama. Among the guards, in the shade of the fountains and fragrant flowers, stood a young man named Jinya, 28 years old, wearing glasses, with a tired face covered in sweat. He was appointed as the commander of the surveillance in case something went wrong and the safety of the royal family was threatened. He stood quietly near the water in the garden with the other guards, carefully watching what was happening, knowing that at any moment the order to act could be given, and the safety of the palace and everyone in it could depend on his quick reaction. Pluto was a true demon, whose name made even the bravest soldiers tremble. A commander-in-chief whose ruthless tactics and superhuman strength on the battlefield turned every fight into a slaughter in which fear and death were his faithful allies. Smart Jinya shuddered with his whole body, as if he had been struck by lightning, and immediately gave a sharp order to the rest of the guards to tense up and get ready, because, according to his feelings, Pluto himself, the commander of their nightmares, was approaching them with confident and unhurried steps. The young man, pressed against the wall, squeezed his eyes shut as tightly as he could, but not so much out of fear of the high command, but because of the excruciating internal tension. He was immensely afraid of disappointing Pluto, because for him he was an ideal, an almost mythical figure of power. It was the first time in his life that he had seen Pluto in person, and his eyes widened with endless excitement as he watched him, surrounded by an aura of cold grandeur, approach in a spotless white suit, cane in hand, walking measuredly and confidently like the Lord of Time himself. Young Pluto had an icy, bone-piercing gaze, perfect, almost unearthly features, skin as white as porcelain, and a magnetic, almost supernatural aura hovered around him. The air seemed to thicken just from his appearance. Jinya felt a huge heat rise to his cheeks as he realized that his commander, in his incomprehensible charm and dignity, literally attracted glances and thoughts to himself, like a star awakening something fragile and trembling in the heart. Pluto waved his hand confidently, his voice menacing and majestic, as he announced to his army that all of their efforts were now to be directed solely towards finding the mysterious Easter eggs hidden everywhere. The cunning Jinya frowned, because his male intuition immediately told him that the commander did not show the slightest interest in the eggs, which meant that this whole fun search mission had some other, much more mysterious and important goal. A young knight with fiery hair and a scattering of freckles stood nearby, and lowering his voice and smiling mysteriously, he suggested that the real reason for the search for the eggs was Sir Pluto's desire to get the first dance from the princess at the upcoming ball. Jinya silently approached his friend, gently placed his hand on his shoulder, pulled him slightly closer, and, almost in a whisper, with an anxious intonation, said, "All these eggs are not toys at all, but carefully disguised combat beans that pose a serious threat to everyone." The man, sighing heavily, began to explain to the frightened girl that in fact these strange objects were planted by enemy spies, and in order not to sow panic among the people, the authorities made up a story about a festive game, not suspecting anything about the real danger. In the depths of the young man's cold and focused eyes, one could detect something more than just fear. It was a sincere, burning determination, a willingness to give everything to defend his homeland and save the empire, despite the unknown danger that threatened them all. A third warrior quickly approached the two worried interlocutors, looking around warily, and, lowering his voice, asked with excitement, "Is it really true that these bright eggs are disguised explosive devices that can destroy everything around, flooding the country into chaos?" Just 10 minutes later, with the first glimmer of alarm in their eyes, a serious egg hunt began. The knights fought with their own doubts and collected them, thinking about only one thing: how to protect the empire from the inevitable disaster that could strike at any moment. Night enveloped the land with its cold breath. The stars froze over the silent plain, and the silvery moon majestically floated across the dark sky, watching history unfold against the backdrop of its light, gradually absorbing the night with its soft glow. The little girl quickly discovered one egg in the nest, among the fragments of bird remains, and, trembling slightly with excitement, held it in her hands. She was struck by the unusualness of the find, which seemed to conceal some mysterious, unknown power. The girl watched with rapt interest as the egg swayed in her hands, as if it was beginning to come to life, and then, to her surprise, it began to transform, filling her inventory with a sense of magic. All the surrounding silence seemed to freeze, leaving her alone in this magical moment. The hardest part was finding a transformation egg that could affect the change of a creature, and of course, the royal egg, which had the power of ancient magic and was extremely rare. It was a real test for the kids. Artemis was determined and passionate about finding that rare transformation artifact she read about in the ancient book, because it could help her fulfill her dream of escaping the palace and finding her freedom, hiding from everyone. Bare feet felt the coolness of the morning grass when a mysterious voice, as if emerging from the very depths of the forest, spoke words full of bitterness. It was useless to save these chicks because they would die anyway, unable to survive in this merciless world. The little girl sat on the ground, her eyes fixed on her long white hair, which was fluttering about in the wind, and her heart was beating faster, as if nature itself sensed the anxiety that pierced her thoughts and doubts on the edge of her resolve. There, below, stood a young man with a serious expression on his face, and, ignoring her surprised look, he quietly stated that these birds were not at all the cute creatures that one might imagine them to be, but real monsters, dangerous to everyone. Their presence could lead to irreparable consequences. Sweet Artemis stared at him curiously, with her big eyes, trying to figure out who he really was. What kind of unusual strength and confidence was hidden behind this man? What he could hide behind his external calm and mysterious aura? The boy held a bird in his hands, and despite his youth, his appearance was strikingly noble. Snow-white hair, golden eyes, clear skin. All this created the impression that he was not an ordinary person, but something more significant. However, there was a strange feeling that you were not talking to an ordinary boy, but were entering into a dialogue with the very essence of nature, which was hidden behind his image, carefully observing every movement and event, as if he were its embodiment, and not an ordinary person. It quickly became clear that this was not just a character, but the third main character of the book, a dragon of great power hiding behind the role of a candidate for father. And in his eyes, one could read the wisdom and weight of the decisions he had to make, realizing all his responsibility. With sadness, the boy said that his father, the bird, was brutally killed, despite all his desperate efforts to protect his chicks until his last breath, like a true protector, fighting against invisible enemies and evil that threatened his family and everyone he loved. The girl looked at him in surprise when he, as if cutting off the last hope, ordered them to stop trying to save the children, saying that their salvation was impossible. Their fate was decided even before they had time to understand what had happened and realize that it was too late to save them. The little birds were doomed to perish when their father, their protector and support, left. Their desperate cries, full of fear and pain, rang out loudly in the empty nest, filling its darkness and silence like a last song that was not destined to be heard. The girl's hand clenched the fabric of the dress into a fist. Her heart sank from great pain and hopelessness. Every movement she made was like an attempt to hold back a wave of emotions, but helplessness and bitterness from the fact that she could not change the fate of these little creatures overwhelmed her. The little girl argued with the boy whether he did not feel sorry for the little birds sitting on the branch. The girl could not understand how one could not feel sympathy, looking down on such fragile creatures who depended on their parent, like helpless children waiting for help. She loudly declared that it was mean to think that the chicks could not survive without the help of their parents, because they also had a right to life, no less important than other creatures that they surrounded themselves with in this cruel and merciless world, full of dangers and difficulties. In this novel, these monsters were known to love their children extremely much and were willing to give all their precious resources and means to protect them from any danger, sparing no effort for their safety and bright future. Regardless of the circumstances, the evil that had befallen Artemis was piercing as she cried out that it was unfair to not allow the babies to live on without their parents, when their fate had been sealed and they were doomed to die from the start, with no chance of salvation. The noblewoman remembered her past life, from another world, when, remaining an orphan, she had to learn to survive in conditions where there was no protection, no love, and every day became a struggle for survival, full of cruel difficulties and trials. The girl froze in surprise when one of the chicks suddenly chirped, attracting her attention with its melodic voice that cut through the silence. Usually, such birds did not show interest in people, remaining wary and cautious in their presence. And after that, the cute monster began to cuddle up to her fingers, as if he was looking for affection and understanding, despite the fact that usually these birds did not particularly like people, were always wary of alien creatures and avoided contact with them, remaining wild. Suddenly, a young man standing nearby declared that, in their empire, there was an ancient and forgotten legend, according to which, one day, they would definitely have a good-natured maiden with a huge heart who would be able to tame this evil monster, coping with its rage and wild, destructive behavior. The princess with red eyes, confused and a little interested, listened attentively and with growing curiosity to the guy who told her that for thousands of years, no one had seen anyone who was able to tame this wild monster. So dangerous was he, so unruly, and did not give in to attempts to pacify him. Artemis herself came here only for the Easter egg, not predicting a single moment that could disrupt the woman's quiet and simple plans, because she expected only the light pleasure of searching for this symbol of the holiday, and not a collision with unexpected events. Suddenly, the branch under the cute little girl's feet began to wobble, and at that moment, when she felt that she was losing her support, she cowered in fear, trying to maintain her balance. But she could not cope with it, and her body began to move rapidly downwards, in complete panic. With the chicks and nest in her hands, she, screaming in fear, began to fall from the tree, unable to stop her rapid and helpless descent, and it seemed that her fall would inevitably end in a painful collision with the ground, bringing pain and disappointment. Suddenly, the boy standing next to her grew into a man in the blink of an eye. scooped the princess up in his arms, not giving her even a second to think about falling, and held her tightly in his arms, preventing her fall and protecting her from the inevitable impact with the ground, his strong arms becoming her only salvation. The young man was simply delightful. His long white hair fell softly on his shoulders, and his eyes, which sparkled with a bright golden light, reflected the sun's rays, creating the impression that they concealed all the riches of this world and mysterious secrets inaccessible to most. Artemis, shocked by what was happening, looked at him in surprise, pressing the nest tighter to her chest, completely absorbed in his presence, unable to tear her eyes away, as if in shock, where his every movement became important and filled with a mysterious secret, beckoning her deeper and deeper. Myth usually preferred to hide his true power, taking the form of a child to remain unnoticed and invisible to others, and only becoming an adult when magic was needed, using mana to unlock his true power and potential hidden from view. Suddenly, the man, sensing the moment of closeness, kissed the baby on the forehead, and she became all embarrassed, feeling how her heart began to beat faster, and her face became covered with a blush, as if the whole world around froze at that moment, leaving the two of them in this warm and exciting moment. The little girl listened shyly as he explained that now, with the mark on her forehead, she would be able to call upon the dragon whenever she needed it, and a feeling of power grew within her that this gift was now hers, ready to be revealed at the right moment. And after the handsome man argued with the little girl, he wondered if she understood what he had said earlier regarding her birthday present, which turned out to be so significant and mysterious for both of them, like a harbinger of something great that was about to happen. Carefully and with care, he placed the young baby on her feet, on the soft ground, in the fresh grass, allowing her to feel the solidity under her feet again, returning her to reality, where everything was no longer as exciting and unusual as at that moment when they were together. The girl closed her eyes when suddenly a cold wind gently touched the woman's face, making her feel how this light flow of air brings not only freshness, but also the feeling that the world around her is starting to change again, as if something invisible is ready to appear. And so, in the end, the beautiful Artemis was left alone, standing in the forest, looking into the space in front of her, where there was not a soul, but only deep silence surrounded her, filling the air with a feeling of emptiness, as if something important had gone, leaving only an elusive trace, as if her whole life had frozen for a moment. And only one Easter egg, brightly painted, lay among the grass, like a quiet, almost forgotten symbol of a past moment, reminding us that sometimes the most important events are hidden in the most inconspicuous and ordinary things left along the way. Still holding the nest with the birds in her hands, the little girl also picked up the egg, examining it carefully, as if it contained some secret that she could not yet understand, but which was important for her future, no matter how strange it may sound. Suddenly, a voice in the silence of the night penetrated her consciousness, like a whisper of the wind or moonlight, and something, like a call from another world, reached her. Now she could change her appearance, turn into another person, hiding her true identity and finding herself next to someone who was far away. Artemis was deeply touched that she was left with such an unusual gift, which the lady had been looking for so long, and her heart was filled with gratitude because this moment did not seem accidental, but as if everything was predetermined, as part of a woman's destiny. Suddenly, the princess raised her head and was surprised to notice two ladies walking next to her. One was all in black, her figure merging with the shadow, and the other stood out brightly with her outfits, like a ray of sunshine among the clouds, attracting Artemis's attention with her bright colors. Artemis wanted to leave, but something stopped her. She stayed, overhearing a conversation where the ladies discussed a sir named Pluto, who was familiar to her, and at that moment she felt a strange uneasiness, realizing that their words touched on something important and, perhaps, connected with her past. The girl remained in complete shock as she heard many people discussing how the eggs she thought were just beautiful and unusual were actually bombs, and a lot of questions arose in her head about how long this threat had been hidden from everyone and what they would now have to do with this terrible discovery. The beauty in the peach dress and elegant hat decorated with exquisite flowers turned to her interlocutor in horror, asking what they should do now, because the thought that all this could lead to death did not leave her, and she desperately did not want to die without knowing the truth and deciding how to act. Her embarrassed blonde friend, all blushing, muttered something in response that it was nonsense, like they would be rewarded if they were the first to find the eggs and bring them to the commander of the knights. But these words could not calm the princess, because she felt that there was something more hidden behind this story. However, the princess, despite all this, did not lose her enthusiasm, believing that this was just a rumor or a joke, nothing more, and continued to hope that this darkness that had thickened around them would disappear as soon as they learned the truth, although anxiety was already piercing her heart, not giving her peace. A girl in a delicate peach dress, with a gust of warm spring wind, rushed to run along the winding path after her friend, her silky hair fluttering behind her, and her light steps barely touched the ground, as if spring itself was trying to catch up with its reflection. Without thinking for a single moment, Artemis squeezed the magic egg tightly in her slender palms and whispered an ancient spell, transforming herself into the same mysterious blonde who had just passed by, gaining a perfect, almost invisible disguise. The chicks began to chirp loudly and in unison, opening their tiny beaks, and their soft, snow-white fluffy feathers trembled in the cool wind, like light flakes of the first snow, filling the fragile silence with the pure, living, sincere sound of a newborn morning. The girl slowly walked forward, carefully stepping along the path, tightly hugging the fragile birds, tremblingly touching them with her cheek, as if feeling their warmth with her heart, not noticing how from afar, eyes full of hidden excitement and silent admiration were watching her every step. On a tall, densely foliated pine tree sat the mysterious Mr. Dragon, watching the girl attentively and with slight mockery. His lips were touched by a soft, almost affectionate smile, as if he had a presentiment of something magical and unusual. The boy was not at all surprised by how quickly the little girl found the special egg, because her luck seemed to shine from birth. After all, she was the daughter of a queen, the heir to a great destiny, born under the light of magical stars and an ancient prophecy. That woman, her clever mother, was not just a queen standing at the throne. She was a great and noble ruler, in whose refined beauty shone inner strength, and in her hair, intertwined with a shining wreath, as if the chronicle of the kingdom itself and the whisper of the stars lived. Seeing off the young daughter of dragons with a warm and attentive look, full of kindness and hope, he quietly wished her luck in finding the rest of the magic eggs, hoping that fate would illuminate her path with light, and each test would become a step towards the world that awaits feminine strength. The moon, still hanging in the endless dark blue sky, cast its soft, almost magical pearl light onto the earth, enveloping the night world in a silvery glow, as if silently blessing every traveler who keeps a spark of faith and eternal hope in his chest. The princess, breathing heavily from fatigue and tension, with her fists clenched painfully, rushed away through the dense, whispering shadows of the forest, furiously cursing the absurd romantic story into which she had fallen, as if into a bad dream, and thirsting for her freedom. It was the brave and noble Hercules, according to the original version of the magical novel, who became the hero who managed to find the legendary royal egg and brought it to the princess. But where exactly he found it remained a great mystery, exciting the minds of thousands of people. The only thing the man with a thoughtful and focused face told then was that he had discovered the precious egg completely by accident, at the very moment when he was carefully and kindly returning to the nest, a tiny chick that had fallen from a tall tree on a warm summer evening. Suddenly, the beautiful beauty froze, catching a barely noticeable movement in the foliage. On a tall tree, very close by, she saw a man with a strong build, holding a fragile nest in his hands, and this sight awakened anxiety, lively interest, and slight excitement in her heart. The lady stood awkwardly, almost unnoticeably, frozen in the thick shadows, trying to hide behind the rustling green bushes, barely breathing, tensely watching what was happening with bated breath, as if afraid that one wrong move would disturb the magical atmosphere of this strange and mysterious moment. The man looked at the chick with kindness and care, gently whispering to him not to fall again, because his mother bird would be very worried about him, and he understood perfectly well how important it was to save the life of this tiny creature, just beginning its journey in the world. This man had brown smooth hair, and his eyes, pierced by a light, hid a secret behind them. And despite his stern appearance, he was a real handsome man with a strong will and an aura of confidence that attracted the attention of everyone around him. With his strong hands, full of strength, but at the same time filled with tenderness, he carefully held the chick, trying not to cause him the slightest harm, and with complete attention, he made sure that he felt safe, giving him a feeling of peace and care. He was full of dignity and determination, and despite his youth, he radiated such inner strength and charisma that everyone who was around him felt confident in his ability to cope with any challenges. And he was Hercules, a noble and courageous young man. The young man awkwardly sat down on a stone that was right in front of him, and, without taking his eyes off the girl, he looked at her strangely and attentively with his big eyes, full of sincere interest and slight wariness, as if her mysterious look awakened even more questions and emotions in him. Without thinking twice, the man deftly jumped from the tree and, landing softly, found himself right in front of the lady. His movements were graceful and confident, like a real hero, ready at any moment to help or share his great wisdom. After this, the man, smiling, asked with genuine interest whether the aristocrat had also looked for Easter eggs, carefully watching her reaction, as if this question could become the beginning of a deeper and more fascinating conversation that would reveal her interests and secret passions. Sweet Artemis, blushing with embarrassment, quietly replied that she, too, had helped the chicks, and in her hands lay a small nest, in which she carefully guarded the weak and vulnerable chicks, as if they were her own children, deserving the warmest care. The man was greatly intrigued by this unusual lady, which led him to ask many questions, including whether she was a foreigner, what languages she could speak, and other curious topics, trying to uncover the woman's identity and other secrets. After thinking for a moment, the strong Hercules fell silent, as if he were temporarily immersed in thought, and then, deciding to try a new way of communication, he spoke in another language, hoping that the strange lady might be able to understand him and answer his questions, dispelling her mystery. Artemis stood silently before him, her eyes radiating surprise and delight, as if she was looking for answers to questions she had not yet dared to ask. Feeling her heart beat faster, and her tongue as if it could not convey all the emotions that overwhelmed her fragile feminine soul. Hercules, personifying the ideal of male strength and great intelligence, was not just a muscular, pumped-up man, but also possessed a bright mind, knowledge that was admired, because he spoke many languages, which emphasized his exclusivity and broad outlook, capable of surprising. Underneath the external strength was the story of his life, filled with difficult trials in childhood, which became lessons in resilience and perseverance for him, because despite all the difficulties, he managed to get a higher education, following his dream, not stopping in front of obstacles. Suddenly, Hercules grabbed her hand, offering to help her return to the banquet. His voice was soft but confident, expressing his readiness to support her, to help in this night silence, where every step seemed important, and every word of his, concern for her. The couple walked quickly through the forest, skirting tall trees and thick bushes, not paying attention to the dark forest around them. Only the bright moon illuminated their own path, creating an atmosphere of solitude and tranquility, while all around there was silence, and there was not a soul. Their hands were firmly connected. His masculine strength was felt in every movement, as if nature itself was submitting to his power, and her fragile palm seemed to melt in his. In this contrast, all the tenderness of their unexpected union was revealed, filling the air with a feeling of warmth, care, and quiet harmony so rare in this world. Suddenly, Hercules broke the silence by speaking first. He admitted with slight sarcasm that he was a real idiot for not being able to find a single Easter egg in all this time, and perhaps this was a sign of his bad luck, or just that he wasn't very lucky in such things. And here, as if in contradiction with the expected denouement, the plot of the novel took a completely different path, because Hercules had to find the egg, but it seems he was never able to do so, and his failure remained a mystery that no one could solve. although everyone was sure that he was capable of more. Apparently, the changes brought about by the appearance of Artemis forced history to take an unexpected turn, because her presence could radically change the course of events, and her influence on the development of the situation became more and more obvious and significant, as if fate itself wanted to change its plans. After Hercules saved the chick, his destiny seemed to be predetermined. He was supposed to find the egg, become a hero, and his name would become a symbol of good luck and honor. But ultimately, despite all his efforts and sincere attempts, he was never able to fulfill his task, leaving everything to chance. Confused and with bitterness in his voice, Hercules began to talk about his past, admitting that he was a terrible father and was afraid to even approach the princess to talk to her, because it seemed that all his efforts were in vain, and he could only hope that he would be able to please her with a gift. With a loud and bitter laugh that seemed to echo unspoken grievances and regrets, he began to complain about his unsuccessful role as a father, admitting that he could not really please his daughter, did not know how to make her happy, and this thought weighed heavily on his heart, forcing him to doubt. Suddenly, the girl stopped abruptly, as if an invisible wall had stood between them, and with determination refused to go further. Her steps froze in the air, and her eyes, full of emotion, expressed something unspoken, that Hercules felt a heavy silence hang between them, as if her words were invisibly transmitted. Hercules noticed her confusion and stopped immediately, surprised by her unexpected reaction. With concern in his eyes, he approached her and carefully asked what had happened, realizing that perhaps he had moved forward too quickly and perhaps he was walking too fast for her. Their hands were tightly intertwined, and each step taken in agreement seemed to be an extension of each other, creating a sense of unity where there was no room for unnecessary words. There was a depth to this silence, full of unspoken emotions and an invisible connection, stronger than anything that could be said out loud. In the original story, the man was eventually supposed to give the princess an egg as a symbol of his acceptance, and then introduce himself to her as a father, trying to be the kind of person she could turn to for support and care. But things didn't go as he expected. Confusion filled her heart, and she suddenly lowered her head, feeling the weight of doubt and misunderstanding envelop her. Hercules, watching this, also felt his soul being pulled down, realizing that perhaps it was the actions that led to this outcome. And now he was confused, as if he had ruined everything. Suddenly, as if pulling herself back from her own confusion, the girl grabbed his fingers sharply, returning everything to its original place, and they were again close. The woman's hand was warm, and her gesture was decisive, as if she decided that it was her actions that could fix everything. She pulled the young man along with her, ignoring all her doubts and fears, trying to atone for her own mistakes and return to the moment when everything was still in its place, trying to build trust between them again, as if everything was just the beginning. They stood there, exchanging glances, and there was a special connection in the air, like a silent promise that together they would overcome any difficulties. Hercules' tender heart filled with gratitude for her words, and he felt as if she was giving him hope again. Her words sounded like music, filled with lightness and determination. The girl promised him that she would not leave him in his search, that she would be with him until the end, because this sincere support became for him that very beacon that illuminated the path in the fog of doubts. Together, with full determination and quick steps, they began a fast and exciting search for Easter eggs, their hearts beating in unison, and in their eyes there was a spark of determination and confidence that this day would be special and the challenges surmountable. The beauty, leaving the fragile nest with little chicks in the care of the sweet guy, ran with determination into the depths of the forest to look for the treasured egg under the trees. Her confident steps and quick movements showed how determined she was to help Hercules. The beauty climbed the high branches of trees with skill and a sense of complete dedication, checking each nest with care, her eyes sparkling with impatience and her heart beating in her chest, because every moment could become decisive for their common triumph in the search for that very egg. She carefully touched the shell with her fingers, holding her breath to check how strong it was, whether it would be damaged in the process, and that everything was going according to the pre-planned plan. carefully evaluating every movement, feeling wary, as if she had a premonition of something. Some of the eggs had already cracked, and little chicks were beginning to peek out from their cracks, chirping happily and trying to get out with enthusiasm, creating an atmosphere filled with liveliness, and it was impossible not to notice their sincere, hopeful enthusiasm. The hooked hen, squinting her eyes in surprise, watched the birds attentively, and, instantly catching something strange in their behavior, realized that something was wrong here. She listened warily to the surrounding sounds, as if she had a presentiment that she would soon become aware of something alarming. And then, when Artemis turned around, she met the gaze of a fiercely wary bird standing nearby, as if expecting something unpleasant, and this moment was filled with tension, and the girl felt an icy cold creep over her skin, making her freeze. The girl's eyes, full of horror and confusion, narrowed sharply in fear when she realized that something much more terrible was happening than she could have imagined. Her body tensed, ready for action, but her mind was completely confused. It was a terrible mother of monster chicks, 3 meters tall, with bright yellow wild eyes, full of frantic rage and instinct for destruction, whose gaze pierced everything around, making the heart stop with fear and despair, because she did not forgive those who dared to come too close. Its knife-sharp beak was ready to attack at any moment, grabbing its prey and eating the enemy, brushing it aside as if nothing could stop its ruthless power. Because for this powerful and dangerous bird of prey, everyone was just easy prey. And then, suddenly, the bird quickly grabbed Artemis with its powerful beak, not giving her the slightest chance to resist, and, as if not noticing her weakness, lifted her high into the air, carrying her into the sky like a defenseless toy, trembling in its huge claws, completely in its power. Hercules, without thinking, rushed to run after her to help the poor girl, feeling how anxiety gripped his heart, because he could not allow her to end up in the hands of this monstrous bird, which threatened her life and could be her end. Quickly he grabbed the blade from the knives, ready for a brutal and dangerous fight. His gaze was full of determination, and every muscle in his body was tense, ready to meet any threat that could harm Artemis and put her in mortal danger. The bird, with a deafening roar, soared rapidly into the sky, carrying Artemis with it, its huge wings flapping powerfully, and its sharp claws clutching the girl like a captive, carrying her higher and higher into the dark skies, where there was no salvation, no hope, but only silent horror, like a sign of imminent death. Hercules, with an expression of horror and despair on his face, screamed desperately, calling for the princess, but she had already flown away with this giant bird, disappearing into the distance, kidnapped by a terrible monster, and his attempts to help were becoming useless and futile, leaving him without hope. Sweet Artemis, finding herself in the abyss, realized that there was no point in expecting help from the knight. Her face was distorted with fear, and her consciousness was filled with anxiety, because all that remained in this terrible flight was an endless fall, helplessness, despair, and the realization that her life was hanging by a thread. But suddenly, despite all the difficulties and fear, Hercules, clinging to a tree, with incredible effort was able to get out, making his way through the branches with unimaginable speed, knowing that his only goal was to catch up with the bird and save Artemis, risking his life, without thinking about the consequences. His foot was torn off the branches with difficulty. Each step became more difficult and dangerous, but Hercules did not give up, overcoming all difficulties with incredible determination and willpower, and continued to rush through the trees, not knowing the obstacles in his path, striving for salvation. And suddenly, he jumped sharply towards the beauty, preparing to snatch her from the clutches of the giant monster, feeling his heart beating in his chest with incredible force, because he needed to act quickly, otherwise there would be no chance of salvation. Artemis, feeling fear grip her, screamed, calling the man's name, with the last hope that he would save her. And this scream was full of desperate faith and selfless trust, because she knew that only he could pull her out of this trap and save her from the monster. The young man, clutching the monster's paw, asked with a furious, determined cry if the beauty was okay, his voice trembling with anxiety and worry, because his only goal was to ensure her safety, and save her from this nightmare they both found themselves in, not allowing the monster to defeat them. The two of them found themselves in the air, flying on a bird of prey, and despite the danger of this situation, they understood that only their joint efforts could help them survive and defeat this incredible threat that now hung over them. Desperate to escape from the trap, the bird began to flap its huge wings in the air, trying to throw the people off itself, and its every movement was full of rage and despair, as if it was trying to tear away from itself these brave men who dared to fight with it. Artemis could not stand it and, suddenly losing her balance, began to fall, her dress fluttering in the wind like a light cloud, carrying her into the abyss, where there was no salvation, no hope, only a cold, piercing air that enveloped her from all sides, causing a feeling of hopelessness. Hercules, with his excellent reaction and willpower, quickly jumped down and landing on the ground with a heavy, dull sound, he, almost losing his balance, fell to his knees, barely managing to stand, feeling how the earth pumped his body, and his heart continued to beat at a furious speed. After this, the young man, with an effort getting to his feet, with a determined and full of determination look, ran towards her, his voice trembling with excitement and anxiety, asked if she was okay, if she was alive and not hurt, because his only concern now was her safety, her integrity. The bird, meanwhile, had landed near them, and seemed to have no intention of staying in place, its huge wings flying tirelessly through the air with a loud noise, as if it were preparing to rise into the sky again and continue the attack, trying to throw them back and attack again with even greater fury. The couple was stunned by what was happening, their eyes filled with surprise, because the monster suddenly left them, and they began to whisper quietly among themselves, deciding whether they should leave before the monster returned, for there was not much time left, and if they did not hurry, the consequences could be disastrous. Hercules, feeling responsible for the girl's safety, stepped forward, confidently saying that she should follow him because he was ready to protect her from any threat, not doubting that their salvation depended on his determination and readiness to fight this monster, which had now become their enemy. Suddenly, as if by magic, they found themselves back in the cave, and Artemis, with a slight expression of alarm and awareness of the new danger, explained that the bird would not let them leave just like that, for its aggression was too strong to simply let them go without consequences. She began to explain to him that the bird probably thought that they were trying to steal her baby, and now, guided by her instinct to protect her offspring, she would do everything she could to prevent them from leaving, no matter how they tried to get out of this nightmare, because in her eyes they had become a threat to her children. Hercules, with tenderness and respect, grabbed the lady's palms in his strong hands and, admiring her intelligence and knowledge, thought how much she understood about monsters, because her wisdom and experience in such situations amazed him, making him admire her determination and courage even more. Artemis fell silent when they started asking her questions, because perhaps she really did know ways that could help them escape from here, and although she didn't want to reveal all her cards too much, in her gaze one could read a hint of hope and confidence that there was still a way out. With a naive smile, the man carefully said that now they had to find a way to get permission from the female monster for them to leave, because without her consent they would not be able to simply leave this place, and he could only hope that his approach would be correct. With her head down, the beauty said that it was unlikely that they would be able to just leave, and despite the seemingly impossible situation, there was confidence in her voice that there was another way to get out if they used the situation correctly and acted correctly. The couple began to discuss how they could get out of this trap, standing near the entrance to the cave, because if the monster disappeared, then the barrier that prevented them from passing would too, and they could use this moment to escape without leaving a trace behind them. The lady extended her hand towards the man's, her eyes full of determination, and firmly stated that they had no choice but to get rid of the monster if they did not want to become its food, for it was the only thing they could do to survive in this cruel situation. It was a harsh law that she had learned in her past life, where there was no room for weakness, because only those who were willing to fight to the last could survive in this world, and she knew that every step she took had to be carefully considered to avoid fatal mistakes. The young man, realizing the gravity of what was happening, bowed his head to the lady as a sign of respect and promised to carry out her instructions, not doubting that he would be able to cope with this challenge and find a way to destroy the monster as soon as it appeared again. The girl, feeling hungry, began to think about how to find food and sustenance because her strength was running out, and anxiety tormented her because she understood that without food and resources, they would find themselves in an even more dangerous situation, and secrecy could disappear as soon as she lost her strength. The moon in the dark sky barely illuminated the earth. Its dim light barely penetrated the thick darkness that enveloped them, and in this darkness, it seemed that their only hope was to find a path that would lead them to salvation, despite all the fears and obstacles that arose on their way. The bespectacled guard continued to carefully search for Easter eggs, which in fact turned out to be hidden various bombs, and his attention was focused on every step, because he realized that the slightest mistake could cost the life of not only him, but everyone around him. A couple of young guys were quietly talking to each other, discussing what to do next and how to find these deadly eggs, because there was very little time left, and their plan was not yet complete, which caused anxiety and only increased the tension that hung in the air. Jinya, clenching his fist, trying to hold back the storm of emotions, stood in front of himself, his eyes full of tears. And, with a heavy sigh, he said that he had let his commander down by failing to come to his aid at this crucial moment. Feeling his failure weighing on his consciousness, consuming him with helplessness and regret, their commander, Pluto, would no doubt be very disappointed and furious to learn that they had returned without any results, as his face was contorted with anger, and he clearly expected much more from his charges, which only increased his disappointment, which seemed to know no bounds. In fact, Pluto couldn't help but think how frustrating it was for his new recruits to be so helpless and clueless when faced with such a critical situation, and that only added to his irritation and frustration. Suddenly, the young man, sharply raising his head, noticed something flashing on one of the trees, and his gaze immediately fixed on this object, attracting attention. But what he saw was so unusual and suspicious that he could not immediately understand what exactly aroused his curiosity. Like a flash of lightning that tore through the night sky, with its booming roar, a sound swept through the hall, so loud and sharp that it seemed that the silence itself recoiled in fear, and the walls trembled, as if realizing the approach of something unthinkable and ominously important. Each of the guards instantly tensed like a taut bowstring, sensing something amiss, something barely perceptible but frightening. An anxious, sticky silence hung in the air, as if time itself held its breath in anticipation of a denouement full of an unknown, terrible threat. The commander, majestic and decisive, appeared before his men with a solemn, almost jubilant look, and, raising his voice, announced that, finally, after long years of searching, sacrifices, and betrayals, he had managed to discover that same legendary secret egg, hidden from everyone. The princess, half her face hidden behind her hand, tried with all her might to concentrate on one thing: how to slip out of this trap so that her partner would not suspect a trick. Her mind was racing, feverishly inventing a way to freedom through the nets of circumstances and deception. Then he, gathering all the determination, courage, and inner fortitude that he could find in himself, with a serious look, declared that he was going in search of the food that was so necessary for their survival. And the lady, with a soft smile and a smooth wave of her hand, quietly wished him luck, as if sending the hero on a long journey. While she sat in the deepest part of the dark cave, pressing her hands to herself in an attempt to warm up and somehow calm her anxiety, Hercules explored the wilderness in a radius of about 500 meters from her, step by step making his way through the darkness and cold, hoping to find at least something edible among the branches and snags. Suddenly, the beauty, with a thoughtful and slightly playful expression on her face, turned her head to the side. An unexpected, and at the same time strangely inspiring idea came to the sweet girl's mind, which she could not simply let go without attention. Hearing a strange, dull, muffled noise, as if coming from the very depths of an ancient and mysterious forest, the lady slowly but decisively walked forward. Her heels clearly and rhythmically beat out a sound on the floor, breaking the dead silence around, as if foreshadowing the approach of something great. The very next moment, the beauty's eyes opened wide in frightened trepidation. Her gaze froze in horror, because something so incredible, frightening, and inexplicable appeared before her that a shudder passed through her body, awakening ancient fears and paralyzing her will. There, in a huge nest covered with branches, dry leaves, and old feathers, next to a tiny chick, lay a strange egg. It looked ominous and was 100 times larger than usual, than what even the largest female of this wild, red, monstrous bird could lay. Usually, these scarlet, wild mother birds, driven by an ancient instinct, would leave their nest immediately after laying their eggs, leaving their hatched offspring to fend for themselves, without a drop of care, warmth, or parental support. But other feathered creatures, especially white, graceful, and majestic birds, on the contrary, showed incredible, almost touching care for their chicks. They did not move a step away from the nest, vigilantly watched every rustle, and warmed the babies under their strong, protective wings. With a frown, an irritated expression on her face, she muttered through her teeth that such strange and illogical behavior of these monsters literally blew her mind. Too unpredictable, too absurd. She sat on her knees, peering into the void with longing and inner tension. With a sharp movement, the girl left a resounding slap on her cheek, as if trying to shake herself and return to her sanity, saying out loud that she urgently needed to get ready. It was at that moment that it dawned on her, as if in a flash of insight. Perhaps this was her only chance. Without thinking twice, and acting more out of desperation than cold calculation, the girl decided to kill the chick, hoping that something would happen that would allow her to escape. With a trembling, uncertain hand, she carefully touched the tiny, fragile body of the bird. But suddenly, Artemis froze, as if rooted to the spot, her breathing ragged and her eyes widened in horror. Her heart began to beat faster when the very bird she had touched suddenly opened its huge eyes, full of an unnatural and frightening awareness. For one brief, barely perceptible moment, it seemed to her that in front of her was not a monstrous chick at all, but a little girl, dirty, weak, with dusty hair and sad eyes, who was looking gloomily and with obvious resentment straight into her soul, as if reproaching her for her intention. And at this strange, tense moment, the strong Hercules suddenly returned to the cave. In his hands was a whole bunch of strange food, several bright apples, bunches of unknown mushrooms, and colorful plants emitting a sweetish and slightly alarming aroma. However, as soon as he entered and saw the lady bending over the chick with an outstretched hand and a strange expression on her face, he froze in indecision. The man's eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, but he did not make a sound, realizing the full danger of the moment. Pulling himself together and pretending not to understand or notice anything, the man said with a wide, slightly tense smile how cute and defenseless this chick was, and, without taking his eyes off the lady, slowly approached closer, as if trying not to upset the fragile balance. The lovely lady stared thoughtfully and warily at the magic bird, an internal struggle raging in the woman's head. Should she kill it now? Because after all, her own life hung in the balance, and every choice could be decisive, influencing her future. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by Hercules, who, noticing her hesitation, offered the lady to try one of the strange mushrooms he had brought. The noblewoman cried out in surprise, stepping back a little, but her gaze immediately turned to him with distrust and confusion. The young man hastened to reassure her, assuring her that the purple plant, despite its strange appearance and bright colors, was completely safe and beneficial to health, because he had personally tested its properties and knew that it would not cause any harm. The world, however, was far from fair, and even the girl herself knew it deep down. The lady remembered her former life, when, as a little girl, she suffered from cruel bullying from other children, experiences that never left her, even in her new guise. Like a butterfly caught in the web of an evil fate, the poor chick was trapped, unaware that his life was hanging by a thread. A tender, vulnerable, and fragile moment that could be destroyed at any moment if someone decided to abuse his trust. The poor chick slept carefree and naive in its nest, not having the slightest idea that its life could end at any moment, and that its fragile existence hung on a tiny thread, while danger, like a shadow, crept up on it unnoticed. With doubt and wariness, the man watched his companion closely, wondering if she really pitied this innocent chick, or if she was hiding darker and more sinister intentions within herself, ready to lead to his inevitable death, disturbing his fragile peace. Suddenly, with a slight sigh and confident determination, Hercules declared that she should not worry, because he was ready to take on all the dirty work for her, so that she would not dirty her hands, and would personally take care of the fate of this creature, without giving her the slightest opportunity to interfere. Artemis, listening to his words, bowed her head in agreement, nodding slightly, expressing gratitude. But in her gaze there was hidden anxiety, because despite the outward determination, she still was not sure what the price of this choice would actually be, and what impact it would have. Having given all the dirty work to the man, the girl with a light sigh headed towards the exit, deciding that she needed to breathe fresh air for at least a minute to clear her head of heavy thoughts, relax a little, and, perhaps, find a solution that would help her avoid future troubles. As she stepped out into the open, her gaze immediately fell on a strange mushroom sticking out of the grass, and although she had no intention of eating it, its unusual appearance caught her attention, making her wonder if perhaps it could be useful in the future if she needed something unusual. Yes, this mushroom was edible, but that wasn't the only thing that mattered. It could be ground into powder and used to make poison, which could prove to be a very useful and dangerous tool in case she had to face a threat or solve a difficult situation. The lady's hand, with a feeling of anxiety and uncertainty spreading across her skin, froze in midair when she suddenly realized that, despite all the absurdities and oddities of the night, there was an unknown kindness and sincerity hidden in his actions, making him an extraordinary person. Suddenly, sweet Artemis turned around sharply as a strange, deep, and melancholy cry of a chick was heard from afar, echoing through the empty, gloomy area, as if begging for help, breaking the silence and filling the air with endless despair. The beauty, feeling anxiety in her heart, walked quickly and confidently to the very edge of the cliff, deciding to take a look at what was happening below, where the cliff looked not only dangerous, but also threatening, and the whole world around seemed frozen in anticipation. There, on a large cold stone, sat a small chick who, apparently, had fallen from a height and was now chirping bitterly with great pain in his voice, desperately calling for his mother, trying to attract her attention, despite his complete helplessness and inexpressible fear. Finally, she realized that there were rare cases where female monsters showed affection for male chicks, despite everything that was happening in their world, and that all these relationships between creatures were much more complicated than she could have imagined. The lady realized that at that moment, the female had most likely gone to check the male's nest to find her lost child, thinking that he had died, but in fact, he had simply fallen down unsuccessfully and was now in complete danger, surrounded by hostile nature and his own helplessness. The lovely lady blushed with great embarrassment, but the woman's face was resolute, as if she had made a decision that did not need words, and her inner understanding of this situation only strengthened her will and desire to do the right thing. The girl, with bated breath, carefully lay down on the cold stone, stretched out her hand into the void, trying to reach the chick, who was clinging with difficulty to the edge of the rock, hoping that her efforts would be strong and accurate enough to save him from imminent death. Hercules flinched as, with amazing strength and agility, a hand suddenly appeared out of thin air in front of him, using powerful magic, and quickly reached out towards him, and his eyes reflected genuine fear, because he realized that the danger was creeping up too fast to ignore. The lady realized with growing concern that her hand, despite all its strength and desire, had already covered 500 meters. But alas, she could not reach the little monster, who was too far away, and despite her efforts, she could not save him, which brought pain and despair. The young beauty could not understand why she was so desperate to save the poor chick, because before she was ready to kill him, believing that his life had no value, but something changed in her heart at that moment, forcing her to act differently. No one ever tried to save her in her previous life. No one showed interest in her pain and experiences, and so she grew up a cold person, capable of ignoring the feelings of others, because her own had long become alien and unfamiliar to her. But the poor, unfortunate child of the monster chirped and cried sadly, his little tears slowly flowing down his tender face, and in the sound, full of hopeless fear and deep loneliness, there was such immeasurable longing that the woman's heart sank as never before, and she could not remain indifferent. And the main character herself, having gone through all the trials and pain, was reborn into a new body, becoming a princess, and her soul, like her consciousness, changed radically, and she was no longer the same as before, becoming a completely different person, a new being with a new purpose. The maiden, shocked by what was happening, quickly called her friend for help, and Hercules, with horror on his face, ran headlong to her, in fear and excitement, asking what had happened, his voice full of anxiety, concern, and great confusion. His steps were quick and uncertain. Firmly, with determination in her voice, the beauty stated, asking the knight to lend her his sword, her gaze focused and her words sounding confident, as if she already knew what she had to do and nothing could stop her at this moment, despite the possible consequences. The girl's hand resolutely grabbed the hilt of the weapon, and immediately she pulled it towards herself, feeling how the weight of the sword filled her with determination, as if it was the only thing that could help in the current situation and save the defenseless creature that she could not abandon. Strong Hercules, raising his hands in excitement, told the lady with emotion that he could have killed the chick instead of her, and that she should not have worried so much, because there was no need for it, and her efforts were superfluous, despite her noble desire and desire to help. The blade was thrown loudly to the side. It slid across the grass, falling far away, creating a sharp sound, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow it, hiding the traces of this dangerous weapon, as if it did not want to leave any traces so that no one could find it. The young man tried to calm the agitated beauty, but she was completely absorbed in her craft, not paying attention to his words, taking the mushroom and the sheath of the blade in her hands, preparing to take the next important action, despite his anxiety and attempts to stop her. The girl had made a determined decision to create a magical sheath that could provide her with protection in the future, and only after she had completed this would she return to saving the chick, believing that this would be the best way to proceed in the current situation without wasting a second. Turning away from the man, Artemis loudly declared to him, standing near the cliff, that they could get out of here without unnecessary casualties and violence, without killing anyone, and there was such determination in her words that they left no room for objections or doubts. She extended her feminine hand downwards, decisively and quickly, as if preparing to take an important step, completely absorbed in her action, not paying attention to the world around her, concentrating all her will on what she had to do, overcoming internal doubts. She carefully placed the end of the stick into the little chick's mouth, aiming it straight at his beak, trying to act with the utmost care so as not to hurt him, because every step she took was important for the successful completion of this mission, which required patience and precision. The beak snapped shut with unexpected force, and the cute little thing, feeling resistance, bit the stick, holding it tightly in his small but strong beak, not wanting to let go, as if deciding that this unfamiliar thing would not let go of him, despite all his efforts. But suddenly, the beautiful little one became frightened and, opening his beak, let go of the stick when the lady began to slowly pull it out, and confusion flashed in his eyes, as if he felt a huge danger that he could not understand, fearing that everything around him would now collapse and disappear. The slope began to crumble, and all the rocks around began to fall, creating a roar that echoed in the surrounding silence, as if the earth itself was trying to tear everything apart, threatening to swallow everything with its chaos, destroying even nature itself, as if in its terrible death throes. The lady's pink hat with ribbons flew off her head and, spinning in the air, also found itself in the path of falling stones, becoming part of the destruction, as a symbol of the fact that everything around her was beginning to collapse and her world was changing forever, absorbing everything around her in chaos, beyond any control. The girl, without thinking, rushed into flight, calling the knight by name, desperately trying to escape from imminent death, ready to do everything to save herself and those who remained nearby, not thinking about the consequences of her actions, relying only on instincts and hoping that luck would be on her side. The red feather of the chick swirled in the air, as if in slow motion, smoothly gliding along the wind, like the last trace of a small creature leaving this big world, leaving behind a barely noticeable spark of bright hope, getting lost in the eternal infinity. Sweet Artemis herself did not understand how she suddenly began to fall. The woman's white hair fluttered in the air, as if it was raining white threads, and everything around suddenly became empty and shapeless, carrying her away into the unknown, absorbing all her thoughts and losing the sense of time. The bird, on the contrary, flew up, spreading its wings as if it had suddenly found freedom, flying into the sky, where a new life awaited it, leaving behind Artemis, who felt how her fall was becoming inevitable, losing her balance, and every moment began to seem like an eternity. The lady could hardly hold back her tears, not understanding how it happened that now she was doomed to fall, while the baby, on the contrary, took off, rushing into the sky, leaving her alone in this destroyed world, like a lonely and helpless creature who could not find a place for herself. Closing her eyes, she silently accepted her fate, realizing that she was destined to die soon, that this was her end, and in her fragile heart there was no room for hope or fear, only a cold acceptance of the inevitable, as if there was no room for a miracle or other changes in a woman's life. Her past was full of quiet sadness. The beauty felt like an orphan, with no one waiting for her or missing her, as if she was just one of many, whose trace quickly disappears into the vastness, and no one will remember her name or her pain, as if she never existed. Suddenly, a cry was heard that called her, and Artemis opened her blue eyes wide, as if she had seen the light, and in their depths a spark of surprise and hope flashed, which seemed to bring her back to life, filling the female soul with bright light and new meaning, like a long-awaited ray in the fog. It was Hercules who was shouting from the cliff, holding out his hand to her and asking her to grab it, his voice sounding full of despair and hope, as if he could save her from certain death. And in his eyes there was a spark of determination that was enough to warm her. The girl extended her hand to him, trembling, filled with doubts and fear. But in her eyes there burned a sincere hope to grab hold of a chance at life, even if this chance seemed so fragile and distant, like a thread in a raging sea, and yet she believed that this was her only path. And then their hands finally touched. Their fingers clenched tightly, and at that moment Artemis felt her heart stop with excitement. But at the same time, she was enveloped in a strange peace, as if fate itself had chosen her, because she was no longer alone, and there was someone nearby who could save her, who believed in her. She fell into the strong arms of the guy, who took pity on her, and he, hugging her, pressed her to his chest, as if not wanting to let her go, feeling that this saving force was the last chance for both of them. And at that moment, they became inseparable, as if fate had linked them forever. After they landed on the ground, the soft surface cushioned their fall, allowing them to avoid serious injuries. But it did not reduce the feeling of intense anxiety and fatigue that filled their hearts at that moment. There was silence all around, but a threat lurked in its depths. They found themselves back in a deep cave, next to another cute monster chick, as if they were back to square one. However, despite this, they were still alive, and that was the only ray of hope that could break through the fog of their disturbing reality. Artemis, feeling a strong sense of guilt for her behavior, blushed with shame. But despite all the mistakes, a spark of hope continued to burn inside her. The lady was ready to forgive herself and accept life as it is, despite all the hard trials. The entrance to the cave was located right at the foot of the forest, where among the tall grass and snow-white night flowers, there was silence, shrouded in the silver light of the mysterious moon, as if the nature itself around was holding its breath in anticipation of something important and exciting. Embarrassedly scratching the back of his head, the strong Hercules admitted that he did not immediately understand the maiden's brilliant plan. At this time, she stood silently nearby, hiding a smile, and mentally asked the guy not to remind her of that annoying stupidity that she had committed with such confidence. Suddenly, the beauty turned to her companion, catching in his voice an uncertain, almost apologetic confession. He dreamed of saving her beautifully, with dignity and nobly, as the heroes of ancient legends do, but everything went completely differently than he expected. There was a slight bitterness and embarrassment in his words. With a slight blush on his cheeks and a hint of disappointment in his voice, the man awkwardly massaged his clenched fist, as if searching for at least a piece of his lost dignity, and with a wry smile said that it seemed he had been completely useless, having failed to carry out either his plan or his role as a protector. This hurt the lady, because she knew that in the original story, this same guy had managed to find the royal egg, prove his valor to everyone, and wipe the nose of everyone who doubted him. He had been a hero, and now he looked confused and broken, and this made her especially bitter. Suddenly, piercing the silence, strange and alarming sounds were heard, like the cracking of branches, a low hum, and the flapping of something huge and alive, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The couple turned around in horror, every muscle in their bodies tensed in anticipation of the inevitable. Before them, majestic and frightening, with a heavy flap of wings, stood the female red bird. She had returned home, like a mistress who had found strangers on her territory. Danger and ancient power burned in her gaze, golden eyes looked with contempt, and wide wings, like bloody banners, obscured the light and caused primordial fear. Hercules silently stepped forward, shielding the lady with his body, and firmly, albeit with a tremor in his voice, ordered her to immediately step back and hide behind him, where, as he desperately hoped, she would be safe from the impending threat, not allowing fear to prevail over her determination. The monster, emitting a deafening roar and raising whirlwinds of dust with its giant wings, flew into the cave with a terrifying roar, heading swiftly towards them, its massive body casting a shadow in which an entire house could be hidden, and each of its steps echoed with tremors in the stone walls. The girl, feeling growing fear and cold, shrank her whole body and pressed herself against the broad back of her comrade, as if he was the last hope for salvation, and internally begged that at least one miracle would work in this gloomy place, and that danger would pass them by. But suddenly, at the most tense moment, as if by an invisible signal, the female of the huge red bird stopped abruptly at the very entrance to the cave, spreading her wings to their full extent, and next to her appeared her chick, who, recognizing his mother, chirped joyfully and greeted her with touching delight. The young couple stood there in confusion, as it finally dawned on them that all those frightening screams and alarming sounds that they had initially taken for rage and threat were actually filled with emotion as the majestic female bird found her lost baby. And now the very sense of danger, like an invisible force, was slowly receding with every second, allowing them to feel the tension easing, and as if giving them unspoken permission to come out of hiding, take a step forward, and breathe freely again. Hercules, unable to cope with the overwhelming emotions, could not hold back his tears when he saw how the formidable mother monster and her chick, separated for so long, were finally reunited. And this moment, pure, sincere, filled with warm love, touched something deeply human in him. The princess, when she realized that her disguise might be revealed and her entire carefully constructed plan would be in jeopardy, suddenly, without thinking, rushed forward with sudden courage, as if a long-forgotten power had awakened within her, capable of moving mountains in order to prevent failure. The chick seemed not to feel all the tension and anxiety around him. He continued to sleep peacefully in his cozy nest, curled up in a ball, as if the whole world around him had ceased to exist, and nothing could disturb his peaceful sleep. The girl, full of determination, smiled firmly. Her smile became wide and confident, and her gaze became resolute, as if she no longer doubted herself or her actions, and in this gaze an inner fire burned, ready to withstand any danger. With her hand, she slowly and reverently touched the large egg, the surface of which was warm, smooth, and seemingly alive, as if a heart was really beating under her palm. And in this touch, everything was red: trepidation, responsibility, understanding of the fragility of the moment. At that very moment, Hercules apparently suddenly realized that the chick for whom it all began was not at all what he seemed, and, trying to save him, he accidentally discovered that very royal egg, a rarity and treasure that in the original story brought him fame and respect. And so Artemis, with eyes shining with delight, became the owner of a special egg. It was deep blue with a pattern reminiscent of beauty, and in her hands it seemed to glow with an inner light, emphasizing that this moment was not just an accident, but a real sign of fate and inner strength. The man, standing nearby and watching the girl hold her find, was genuinely amazed that she had managed to do it. A slight blush appeared on his face. He froze in amazement, barely breathing, and at that moment he simply could not take his eyes off her, feeling that he had witnessed something great. But earlier, the queen had issued the strictest decrees to get rid of the princess if she did not pass the test and was unable to find the royal egg, because otherwise she would be deemed unworthy of inheriting the throne and would forever lose her honor and right to the title. Hercules, with difficulty holding back the tears that were welling up in his eyes, with genuine admiration and a trembling voice, declared that this girl was a real beauty and an amazing heroine, since she was able to find such a rare, almost mythical artifact, the existence of which many only dreamed of. Artemis, with a slight and almost invisible smile on her lips, thought about what a truly wonderful person her companion was, because instead of feeling envy or hidden resentment, he sincerely and joyfully shared her successes and happiness with her. The forest, slowly and surely, began to awaken under the rays of the rising sun, which gradually warmed the earth, filling it with a special, magical light, and the air, which seemed unusually fresh and clean, slowly filled with the aromas of nature. The girl handed the guy an egg. The woman's gaze was at once light but insistent, and the words she spoke were filled with care and sincere intention, because she really wanted him to take it, accepting it as a sign of respect and great trust in him. Kind Artemis, slightly bowing her head in attention, began to slowly walk around him, confidently and gently persuading the modest young man to accept this gift, claiming that he deserved it with his kindness, sincerity, and constant concern for others. Modestly, with slight embarrassment and blushing, the boy said that he was too slow and stupid, and therefore did not deserve to receive the royal egg, considering himself not worthy enough of such an important and valuable gift, because his shortcomings did not allow him to feel his true value. The guy's face became full of sympathy, and he could hardly hold back his tears, because he was shocked by her attention and generosity. Her act became a real revelation for him, and the gift turned out to be a symbol of something big, significant, and kind for him, which he had not felt for so long. Suddenly, the princess became a little girl again. Her disguise fell off, and she handed the egg to the boy, as if returning his lost hopes, showing that even in such a young form, she could be the one who supports him and gives him the strength to believe in a bright future. Hercules was clearly embarrassed that he was being deceived, and suddenly his daughter appeared before him, which completely shocked him, because he did not expect to see her in such a guise, and now everything around him seemed different from how he was used to perceiving it before. Paint felt a strong surge of panic. The world before her eyes began to spin, and a feeling of deep fear engulfed her, not allowing her to concentrate, as if reality began to melt and blur, becoming alien and frightening for the lovely noblewoman. The man, with a feeling of deep respect, said that the lady was clearly a genius, because her actions and thoughts were distinguished by outstanding insight, and this made him sincerely admire her ability to manage the situation and solve complex problems with unprecedented ease. Artemis turned back and looked at her, annoyed, and it was obvious that she was clearly not happy with this turn of events, as she had not expected the situation to turn out this way, and that she would be forced to face such unpredictable consequences. The transformation egg proved useless to her, as its magic did not produce the desired result, and all attempts to use it to change the situation were unsuccessful, leaving her in a very uncomfortable, painful, and extremely difficult situation. Suddenly, Hercules spoke to the little girl, saying that it was time for them to return back to the palace, because he felt that time had been lost, and they needed to leave this place urgently to avoid further unpleasant, disturbing, and inevitable events that could change everything. Suddenly, a strong and relentless wind blew up, and the boy bent down sharply, covering his face with his hands to protect himself from the powerful gusts that began to rush into the cave, creating an atmosphere of anxiety, uncertainty, and growing threat among their plans. as if a harbinger of something significant. The bare foot of a man who was heading towards them with determination and firmness stepped into the cave, and its step was so loud and confident that it even echoed in the dark corners, as if it were a harbinger of something important, alarming and possibly dangerous for everyone, which could dramatically change the course of events. It was the dragon prince, with a nest of chicks in his hands, who appeared at the first call of the princess, and his appearance was not accidental, but filled with determination and a secret purpose that could not leave them alone, because it was his duty to protect and guard those who needed him. The man greeted the large monster bird by petting it, and it was also happy to see him, as if it felt a deep connection with him, responding to his gestures of friendship and trust, which was rare for a creature of its size and power, and also making it clear that it was ready to help. The prince's arms lay before the female, guarding her chicks, about whom she was worried, and she greeted him with a croak, expressing her gratitude and appreciation for his help, and also confirming that their union was important and unbreakable, despite all the difficulties and obstacles. After which, the man joined in front of the princess and asked if she remembered what she had asked him for earlier, because this moment was important, and he hoped that the woman's request would be significant and would bring great benefit in their journey, helping them move forward. Hercules, who was standing behind, also asked with interest what the princess could have asked for as a gift for her birthday, because this gesture contained not only a tradition, but also a deep meaning that could change a lot for all of them, perhaps opening a new path. The handsome young man extended his hand to the little girl, as if making an offer, but not in the usual sense, but as a symbol of his trust and readiness to share his fate with her, hoping that her decision would be the right one and would lead them to their desired goal, strengthening their great union. And the beautiful Artemis, with a light and slightly timid smile, not remembering what she had asked him for, extended her hand to him, hoping that everything would be fine and that they would be able to overcome together all the difficulties that they still had to endure, strengthening their faith in a bright future. Suddenly, there was a bright flash, as if the star itself had torn the sky apart, illuminating everything around with a blinding light, and this moment seemed like an eternity, filled with magical tension and anticipation of something truly great and unusual that was about to happen. And literally, a few minutes later, a large white dragon appeared in front of the girl, dazzlingly sparkling against the sky, majestic and wise, as if it had come straight from her childhood dreams, filled with dreams of miracles, clouds, and heavenly freedom, in which she believed so much. After all, the little girl always admired the endless skies and fluffy clouds that slowly floated across the azure expanse, reminding her of fairy tales, flights, and freedom, which she so lacked, and in which she believed with all her pure and open heart. When Artemis opened her eyes, her breath caught in delight. Before her stretched an endless celestial panorama, where the golden sun gently illuminated the fluffy clouds, and the blue sky seemed so deep and clear, as if it were the entrance to another magical world, full of hope and dreams. The clouds floated slowly and gracefully across the sky, like giant airships carrying fairy tales and memories, and Artemis, looking at them, felt a rare peace and an amazing feeling that her soul had finally risen up to where freedom lives. When the beauty opened her eyes and looked forward, she saw an incredibly beautiful view in front of her, from which her heart fluttered with joy, and at that moment she felt that the world was much bigger, brighter and kinder than she could ever imagine. The clouds floated slowly and majestically across the endless blue sky, unhurriedly, as if enjoying every moment, and it seemed that time stood still, allowing sweet Artemis to feel this magical moment of eternal freedom and great happiness. The sun slowly rose above the horizon, filling the forest with the soft, warm light of dawn, and every branch, every leaf reflected this radiance, as if nature itself was waking up in the rays of hope, coming to life and rejoicing in the new day, which promised to be special and filled with miracles. The girl could not take her eyes off the stunning landscape that stretched out before her eyes. It was like a picturesque picture created by a dream, in which the sky, forest, sun, and flight were mixed, and all this together penetrated her soul, causing awe and admiration. Hercules, looking around, with a slight smile on his face, said that although this day was unusual and full of surprises, he still learned a few important things. And perhaps it is moments like these that make us better and wiser, revealing what previously remained hidden. The little girl blushed when she heard the words calling her amazing, and this unexpected praise made her heart beat faster, as if a warm spark had lit up in her chest, and a blush played on her face, revealing all her confusion and slight embarrassment. In her small but confidently clasped fingers rested the royal egg, a mysterious and precious artifact, a symbol of trust and future changes, which, despite its weight and meaning, she held carefully as something incredibly important and reverent. Bowing her head down and hiding her gaze under the shadow of her eyelashes, she quietly, and almost in a whisper, called her companion stupid. But in this word there was no offense, but a warm smile hidden in her voice, and it was this barely audible confession that embarrassed him to the depths of his soul, forcing him to turn away slightly and scratch the back of his head. Trying to escape from the sudden excitement and embarrassment, the princess quickly changed the subject, starting to tell with a serious look that the bird monsters, despite their external similarities, still had differences in gender, and they could be distinguished by the shape of their beak, the color of their feathers, and their behavior during the mating season. Meanwhile, the dragon flew majestically and smoothly over the tops of tall trees, which swayed slightly in the morning wind, and the dawn sun slowly rose over the horizon, painting the world in gentle pink-gold shades, making every shadow soft and the air filled with magic. The man suddenly blushed, deeply moved to his very soul, when he heard that even these frightening and wild creatures, whom everyone considered monsters, were capable of fighting to the death to save and protect their only companion. With a barely noticeable but sincere smile, the princess expressed the thought that perhaps some of the males of these amazing birds consciously went into danger just to be near those they chose, the fragile and beautiful females who personified everything that was most valuable and worthy. The knight, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists tensely, could barely hold back the tears welling up in his eyes. So strong and unexpected were the feelings that overwhelmed him at the sight of such a sublime and noble manifestation of love in these strange but incredibly touching events. He remembered with astonishing clarity how long ago he had heard those same words, full of sincere love and loyalty, from the lips of that woman who would forever remain in his heart, the majestic and unattainable queen, his eternal love, whose shadow would always light his path. Then, on those warm evenings, the two of them sat comfortably in their bed, absorbed in reading a book, the pages of which seemed to become an important part of their communication, uniting them at that moment, connecting them even more strongly than the most tender words in which one could express their feelings. The queen was truly beautiful in her snow-white shirt, which gently clung to her body, and her shining blue eyes, like two lakes full of mystery, and snow-white hair, flowing like cascades of snow, created an image that was truly unearthly. Then, with a slight irritation in her voice, she turned to her companion, noting that the female had proven to be excessively selfish, having decided to gather a whole harem of males exclusively for herself, without caring at all about others, as if the world existed only for her, and everyone else could simply disappear. Jokingly, they began to play, and now the knight found himself in the powerful embrace of his beloved. Her hands, like iron chains, tightly squeezed him, leaving not the slightest chance of salvation, despite all his strength and determination to escape from this trap, from which there was no way back. The queen, unable to contain her cheerful laughter, burst out laughing loudly, while with a slight mockery comparing herself to a bird of prey, ready at any moment to seize and subjugate everything that comes its way, without pity or hesitation, capturing its prey with ruthless grace. After that, she pulled him closer, her chest pressed softly against his, and her gaze became full of genuine warmth and confidence, as she, with a deep and warm voice, said that she was ready to protect him from all the dangers of the world, no matter what the difficulties, like a true warrior. They both laughed loudly, joyfully, and carefree, like two children absorbed in the moment when the world around them disappeared, and they remained only for each other. Suddenly, as if by a moment of magic, the lady had an interesting idea, which, despite its sincerity, she decided to keep to herself. And so the princess, with every movement, with every glance, became more and more like her late mother. Hercules, watching her, felt a strange mixture of joy and pain, as if his beloved had returned to his life, but in the person of his daughter, reminding him of days long gone. Hercules couldn't help but smile happily as he looked at his little daughter. Her eyes filled with light, and innocence brought him so much happiness that at that moment it seemed to him as if the whole world had frozen in that perfect moment. A deep sadness arose in his thoughts about his beloved, which grew stronger with each passing day, a longing for those peaceful evenings when they enjoyed every moment together, shared warm glances in the bedroom, and memories of her seemed to become more and more painful with each passing year. The couple, father and daughter, were flying on a dragon, their bodies floating in the air, enjoying the weightlessness and freedom of flight, and below them stretched endless green forests, where time seemed to slow down, as if the whole world held its breath, and they, as if floating in the void, were outside of time. Suddenly, the little girl, turning to her dad with a gentle smile, turned to him, expecting his attention, but not hearing an answer. She frowned a little. Her gaze became wary, and she looked at him again, as if she felt that his thoughts had carried him far away, leaving her waiting. The sun was rising, its bright light softly spreading across the sky, filling everything around with a warm glow, as if the world was waking up, preparing for a new day, and each ray, like a steady promise, carried something great and important that was yet to be revealed. Suddenly, the host, with excitement and joy in his voice, announced that the winner of the long-awaited festival had finally been found, an event that everyone had been waiting for, eagerly awaiting. And now this long-awaited moment had arrived like a bolt from the blue, piercing the silence and making the hearts of all those present freeze in anticipation. Endymion was the first winner, but his face was displeased, as if something had gone wrong, and despite the triumph, his gaze remained gloomy and sullen, as if this moment did not bring him the joy that everyone expected, and there was an emptiness in his soul that nothing could fill. He had 4 Easter eggs in his hands, and although this seemed like a clear sign of victory, his face did not reflect the delight and happiness that usually accompanies such moments. His thoughts seemed to be somewhere far away, perhaps in search of an answer to the questions that did not give him such peace. The great Sir Pluto looked at what was happening with skepticism and slight contempt, and the blonde knight, with a displeased expression on his face, was clearly upset and even a little irritated by the fact that his rival, the brunette, had many more balls than he did. With a mocking grin, barely suppressing a grin, the man stated that he had as many as 5 Easter eggs, which turned out to be so heavy that they were almost impossible to carry. And this became a real test of his strength, although he did not want to show weakness. Angrily, and with obvious irritation, pointing a finger at his opponent, the handsome man bitterly declared that he had clearly cheated, since no one, in his opinion, could have achieved such a result honestly, and his victory was highly doubtful, although there was no evidence of this. As soon as the knights in white shining armor gathered around him, his master blushed, clearly feeling awkward and ashamed, because his companions, instead of leaving him alone, helped him in the hunt, performing tasks that should have been his personal task alone. The knights in black listened attentively to Pluto. Their faces remained serious, and they began to carry out his order, bringing other things that were necessary for the task, as if they did not want to miss a single detail. Namely, what they brought was an expensive, rare, and valuable egg, which clearly attracted the attention of everyone present, leaving it unclear what exactly its contents could be hidden in this mysterious shell. The young man, with a quick and dexterous movement, stretched his hand towards the egg, as if afraid that someone might notice his actions, and, carefully pronouncing the words, he emphasized that this egg was something special, unimaginably great in its significance, and probably hid a secret within itself. Proudly, with slight contempt and some superiority, Pluto declared that even with all his experience and knowledge, he could not fully unravel its hidden secret, although he tried, but all his attempts were unsuccessful, leaving this mystery even more unattainable and enticing, which made it even more intriguing. The host, with slight fear and noticeable nervousness in his voice, said in a reserved and almost apologetic tone that this egg, which everyone considered royal and special, was in fact just an ordinary one, like all the other eggs, which somewhat surprised those present. Suddenly, the boy, out of breath and with wide eyes, ran towards the knight, screaming that it was not an egg at all, but his ball, adding even more chaos to the situation, leaving the knight completely bewildered. Pluto, realizing his own absurdity, frowned in annoyance and felt himself blushing with shame, realizing that he had just made a fool of himself in front of everyone, while his face expressed complete disappointment in his own haste. The ball, brightly colored and cheerful, was accidentally thrown to the side, right at the feet of the boy, who immediately caught it, looking in surprise at the unexpected interference in his game, as if not understanding what was happening. The young man blushed in embarrassment and turned gratefully to the man who had returned the ball to him, expressing his appreciation for his kind gesture, but at the same time feeling awkward about the situation he still could not fully comprehend. The knight, visibly embarrassed and a little confused, with a slight blush on his face, looked away to hide his awkwardness and not to reveal how uncomfortable he was with everything that had happened, not knowing how to react correctly. After this, the boy joyfully ran to his mother, an elegant aristocrat, proudly showing her the ball he had just found, as if it were a great treasure that had become a real victory for him that day. Pluto, with a slight sigh and a distracted wave of his hand, noted that despite all the commotion, he still had more balls than his opponent, which calmed him down a little, and he felt confident again. The host noted with a sly grin that it seemed like the guys were really eager to get the first dance with the princess, clearly hoping for her attention, although they themselves tried to hide their impatience and desire to be the center of her attention. Pluto, with a slight frown, replied that he was only trying to protect his daughter from unnecessary attention from others, showing the care that seemed necessary at such an important moment in their lives. The presenter, about to announce the result, suddenly fell silent when one of his friends, a bespectacled guard, interrupted him, looking at him with incomprehension, as if sensing that something was wrong here and the situation was becoming much more complicated than expected. The guards standing nearby were wary and began to wonder if the remaining eggs were actually bombs, carefully disguised as holiday paraphernalia, which could threaten the safety of everyone present. Pluto watched the proceedings with a frown, thinking to himself that these idiots didn't understand what they were getting into. His irritation grew, and when he tried to find out what bombs they were talking about, one of the guards suddenly interrupted him. When Pluto attempted to question them more calmly about the bombs they had mentioned, the guards, without waiting for an answer, turned on him with determination. Pluto barely had time to realize that his intentions had not been taken as he had expected, and before he could continue the conversation, he was immobilized. But suddenly, a dragon appeared in the sky, majestically spreading its wings and gliding smoothly across the clouds. Huge wings, like shadows, blocked out the sun, and he himself, with a fiery gaze, stood out against the sky, creating the impression that nature itself was holding its breath.